Madam Commissioners, Director Sloan,
Good morning.
members of the public, it is very nice to see you all. This COVID pandemic has been very difficult not being in person. So it is just very nice to see you all. Thank you for being here today. And Mr. Attorney General, thank you. Okay, so let's get started. Today is Friday, June 18th. Oh. Can you hear me now? Today is Friday, June 18th, 2021. We are at the New Mexico State Capitol, room 322, 490 Old Santa Fe Trail. I also know that some of you are here today via live stream, and so thank you for joining us. Now, as you know, and it's on the Department of Game and Fish website, should you have any questions or have any issues regarding access, you need aid in receiving this meeting, please contact Tristana Bickford and with the Department of Game and Fish. Her phone number is 505-476-8027. And of course, you can go on the website. So, that said, let us proceed with item number 2 on the agenda, which is also on our website. Mr. Director, Secretary of this meeting, could you please take roll call?
Commissioner Salazar Henry.
Present.
Commissioner Lopez.
Presente.
Commissioner Kramer.
Here.
Commissioner Bates.
Here.
Vice Chair Vesbach.
Here.
Chair Salazar Hickey.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Very good. So let us proceed with agenda item number 3, which is the approval of this particular agenda. I have a very big, thick notebook here, and it's going to be a good day. We're ready to take some action and listen to some very good things here. Commissioners, have you reviewed the agenda? Any discussion, or do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve as presented.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Secretary.
Madam Chair, do you still want to do roll call votes for everything now that we're back in person, or?
You know,
I'm happy to do it.
I think for purposes of today, let's do a roll call for everything today.
Thank you. Commissioner Salazar Henry.
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez.
Yes.
Commissioner Kramer.
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Vice Chair Vesbach.
Yes.
Chair Salazar Hickey.
Yes,
Motion passes.
very good. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Now let us move on to item number 4, which is the general public comments. And I want to say that the commissioners always look forward to this particular section of our agenda. It's important that as we perform our duties, we hear from everyone. And in anticipation of today's meeting, some of the commissioners and I have received some information that I want to bring up before we invite people to the microphone. Director Sloan, if someone wishes to speak, are they going to come to the front center here?
Madam Chair, there's a microphone over on the far side of the room by the door.
Okay, very good. Okay. So before we begin the general public comments, we all know that typically you're going to state your name, you're going to keep your statement to about 3 minutes. We're going to continue as we normally do. But getting back to the point that we have received some information, I would like to present here at this meeting an issue that came up, and it pertains to me. That is that my husband and I have 3 children, and one of our children is a recent graduate of New York University. My husband and I are very proud of our children. And we are empty nesters. Like many of you that are empty nesters, you know that when your children leave your home, they move and they become independent. Financially, but sometimes for moral support, they stay very connected. Okay? So, our daughter recently graduated from New York University in May of this year. She was offered a position at the Module Law Firm. She has not yet begun work at the law firm. She is presently studying for the bar and will hopefully pass the bar and start work in the fall, working in this very large law firm in the tax practice section. Okay? So, commissioners, Department of Game and Fish, and members of the public, I want you to be assured that I believe I can perform my duties in a very impartial manner, with integrity, with honesty, and with full capability, with the passion and the respect that I have for this job, this particular position. I want to say that I have also sought legal advice and I have sought counsel from others to assure that there is no conflict. Okay? From time to time in the past, since I have been chair, in our meetings, we sometimes receive issues from members of the public, and they ask, is there a conflict with a particular commissioner on a particular issue? On today's agenda, item number 6, where we are going to review the applications for landowner certification on non-navigable water. This is a very important issue. And we must, in my opinion, cross every T and dot every I. I'm going to look to the Attorney General's office. Thank you, Assistant Valerie Joe, for being present today. I think it is imperative that we have advice, from counsel, that counsel do a deep analysis of the facts, that there is no conflict, not only of me, but of every commissioner present performing our duties on this issue. For this particular issue, we have federal and state litigation. And because we are in litigation, I think it is imperative that we seek and receive that advice. In my power as chair over the commission, I believe I have the authority, and I will defer to the director and to the commissioners on this, but I believe I have the authority here today to defer today's hearing and action on agenda item number 6 on the applications for landowner certification, because this issue is too important. And I would like to defer to our August 12th meeting. I know it's on the record. Some of our commissioners have a lot of personal business, and it tends to deal with medical and personal, and I believe it's impossible to meet in July. I would recommend a special meeting in July, but I believe that July will be difficult to have. Therefore, I recommend, and I'm ready to exercise that authority, to have our meeting on the applications on August 12th, 2021. so long as Attorney General Valerie Jo, that office, can please provide us and assure the commission, the department, and the public there is no conflict, real or apparent, for any of the commissioners. I know, I firmly believe, and I know that to be true. But beginning with this litigation, we're under some scrutiny. And so I want to say thank you, commissioners, because I'm looking for body language, and I kind of see some acknowledgement of what I'm about to do. Before I get comments from the public, I want to hear from the public. I do want to hear from you, Director, and I also want to hear from all the commissioners, Madam Commissioners and Mr. Commissioners, Mr. Vice Chair. So I'll start with you. Thank you, Director.
Madam Chair, I believe I understand the concern, and I think it is within your purview, your discretion to go ahead and move the hearing till August in order to get that further information and clarification.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to open it up to commissioners. I'm going to tell everyone, we are so prepared. We came ready to perform our duties, our ministerial duties today. I know that. And it has been a lot of work to get to today. But in fairness to everyone, I so respect everyone from all of the public comments. Senator Heinrich, I mean, all of you who submitted emails and comments, I want to say thank you, but I think this is the right thing to do. Mr. Vice Chair?
Well, Madam Chair, this is a surprise. Yeah, I guess, do we have to amend we already approved the agenda, so I just have technical questions that I would push back to our secretary of the commission over there, our director. Would that require an amending of the agenda as well, if the chair has power to just move the hearing today? Can you walk us through any technical issues here?
Madam Chair, Commissioner, I believe that the chair has the discretion to hear items or not that are on the agenda. So I think she's within her purview. I don't know that it would require an amendment to the approval.
That's all I have for the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Madam Chair,
Thank you, Ms. Commissioner.
can you please explain to me the rationale for not proceeding with our approved agenda? And can any agenda item always be moved and deferred no matter what at the chair's sole discretion? But I'm most interested in hearing from, I guess I want to know why we're not dealing with this today after all the preparation. And then I also would like to hear from our attorney about this whole issue of approving the agenda and then not proceeding with that, because I would have amended it before I made a motion to approve it if I knew you were going to want this. So, but mostly I would like to hear your rationale about why we're not doing this today.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. The reason we need to wait for a factual analysis is that conflicts of interest can arise in the courtroom, and they can also arise in a governing body setting. I believe that, and I'm welcome to hear from the public comment, which is where we are in this agenda item. I believe that there have been questions raised such that it challenged individuals, thereby asserting that they should be disqualified from their vote. And in my opinion, nobody should be disqualified in giving a vote. All of the commissioners here today are ready and prepared to vote. But because that issue has been raised, it is important to have it evaluated and looked carefully.
So that's what's gonna happen between now and August. The
Absolutely.
attorneys are gonna go through our conflict of interest forms that we filed with the governor's office and all that good stuff
I'm not going to suggest how the Attorney General's office should perform their duties. If there are other things that they want to look at besides things that have been filed with the state, that's fine. For example, my daughter's offer of employment is not going to be in a form.
Yeah.
So I believe it's important that we have a thorough evaluation of this issue. That's the purpose of delaying the matter. And I apologize, I carefully looked at these letters. I went over them several times. U.S. Senator Martin Heinrich, Mr. Scott Carpenter, Steve Polacco, John Beaver, Brent Taft, Armando Armendariz, Henry Shelton, Amelius Elliott, Chris Tripp, Sherry Barrett, Logan Glassenop, Jesse Dubell, John Crenshaw, Joanna Prukop, and Jim Bates. I looked at all of them, and I respect all the time that we've taken, but there are certain matters that cannot be rushed, and this is a matter that cannot be rushed.
Madam Chair. I'm speechless, but for once. I agree that this is a serious issue. I myself have been questioned on having a conflict of interest on certain items. This conflict came up last minute, and I think probably delaying is the best thing, even though I don't want to at all. And I apologize to the landowners. I just can't even imagine being in their shoes. I mean, my heart goes out to you. I'm so sorry it's come to this. I am so prepared, and I really want to vote. But yeah, I don't see any way around it at this point, and I welcome the Attorney General's office a deep dive into our conflicts of interest. That way that question will go away.
Thank you, Madam Commissioners, both of you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Commissioner.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, I'm kind of flabbergasted today as to what's transpiring here in a public meeting at the Roundhouse. We have dealt with this debacle for the last year and delayed by COVID-19. And I will say on the record that I invite the Attorney General's office to look at any conflict of interest that each and one of us may have. I feel I have none. But I understand the situation at hand as the cards are laid on the table in the last few days. And I will tell the public that I am disappointed that this has to happen like this. Again, we came prepared. We've lost sleep. Some of us have traveled far from across the state to see what's going to happen today. I'll tell you now, I slept 2 hours last night preparing for this meeting. And I guess that's the way the cards fall. So we will see how, we'll see what the chair has to say.
Mr. Commissioner?
Thank you. Well, of course, my preference would be to take action today. I would prefer not to delay, but circumstances have been brought about. So I absolutely respect and recognize your authority to defer, and I'll support that decision.
Chair, a technical question then, since we're learning this all now
Exactly.
in a public setting. I assume this resets the clock and the public has time to insert more comments if people watching today or otherwise want to comment. Are they able to? I mean, we set this meeting fairly quickly and there were only 10 business days to comment. Can you answer that question for people watching in here?
Mr. Director, what do you think?
Madam Chair, I think that's at your discretion. We can make the argument that the record is closed and you're prepared for a hearing, or we could in fact open it up again for another period and close it 14 days before the next meeting and have additional comment if that's what the commission chooses.
Okay, my thought here is cost is always important. And there are costs being incurred by the landowners on this issue, okay? But on the other hand, the importance of due process and fairness and opening it up for comment, I think is very important too. So I'm inclined to say, let's continue to receive and open it up for additional comment. I might also point out that we're still waiting from the New Mexico Supreme Court. Okay? We're also waiting for a 7th commissioner to be appointed. There are several factors that we're still waiting for. So it's not completely disadvantageous to push it back to August 12th. And to answer your question, Mr. Vice Chair, I think it's important to open it up. I would open it up. Okay? But I would put those facts on the table too.
Thank you for that clarification.
Mm-hmm.
And Madam Chair, I think there was a question about the agenda. I would like to state that it has been approved, and it is, as with any item on an agenda, if the issue is to be tabled, as I believe it is for this non-navigable water certification meeting portion, then it is appropriate for it to be on the agenda. And then I guess when it comes to the agenda item, unless we're taking it now, it can be tabled for the date that you are setting in August.
Okay, so you're essentially saying that when we get to agenda item number 6, we just simply acknowledge that this is particular.
I don't see a problem with approving the agenda as it is written, and I just wanted to note for the public that if you do have any concerns or complaints about any ethics violations pertaining to the Governmental Conduct Act or any of the other statutes that pertain to public officials, the appropriate location to put those complaints to are the State Ethics Commission. They were recently created. They do have a phone number of 505-554-7706, as well as an email address, ethics, ethicsh.commission@state.nm.us. So that's just public information for anyone to utilize for their use. Thank you.
There is one other issue that I think we need to address, and that's the location of the August 12th meeting. And I look to Madam Commissioner Salazar Henry, because she did prior to the meeting ask about that, and so I want to say thank you. Because we will be putting these 5 applications at the August meeting, it seems to me best to have the meeting here in Santa Fe, okay? However, I want to say thank you, Madam Commissioner and Department of Game and Fish and members of the public. So there has been such an outcry of respect and a sense of loss over our friend and colleague, Commissioner David Solz, the late David Solz. And so I think for that reason, we need to work to continue to have that honor made for him. But I'm not sure we can do it at August, at the August meeting, but I'll leave that for you to work with the family and with the department. Okay? But I think for the August 12th meeting, everyone, we will be present here in Santa Fe. Okay? So, I'm going to continue and again say that it is necessary. I'm going to apologize, commissioners, because you have put in a lot of work and a lot of time. Like you, we've had a number of meetings, it's just, there's been a lot of work. And thank you, Department of Game and Fish, because you too have been doing many things at your end. But this is the right thing to do. We cannot take these issues lightly. I respect each and every one of you, from the landowners to Adobe Whitewater, all of the litigants, the interveners, federal and state litigation, but members of the public, those who love our wildlife in New Mexico. Okay? So, Mr. Director, we're in agenda item number 4. I think I need not belabor this issue. We're going to defer our 5 applications to the August meeting, and we're going to proceed to public comments. And I'm kind of looking at faces in those present, and you two seem very surprised by what I just said. But I would love to hear from any of you here today, or Mr. Director, if we have any comments coming in from the internet, that would be very good.
So, Madam Chair, it's my understanding we do not have any comment cards for this item, and I believe that what we said on the agenda was that we would read out the comments.
Please proceed to the mic. If you have a comment, please go to the mic. Good. I see one person coming to the mic. That's wonderful. And remember, state your name, who you represent, and if you can, brief, 3 minutes, but I'm not going to watch the clock.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee of the State Game Commission. My name is Marco Gonzalez. I'm the attorney for the applicants and the applications here today. What I want to say is that I believe that this is really a delay tactic that is prejudicing, all of my clients. This was basically just laid as a foundation, the delay for the Supreme Court to decide, which federal court order has already said that that's an appropriate basis to delay action on these applications. So the commission is under an order to act. We want you to act today. There's no conflict with this person, and she's not yet an employee of our firm. And when she is, she can be walled off. I also say, I don't know her. This is news to me. My firm is a big firm. I have never worked with her. I'm not a part of our recruiting committee. I've never ever worked with her and don't know who she is. This was news to me today. So there is no conflict since she has not begun work at the firm. I believe that you all need to move forward. And if there is a claim that there is a conflict, that can be decided post-hearing. And we don't need to further delay this any longer, as my clients have waited and had to go to federal court to get the commission to act. And also, if there is going to be an investigation by the Attorney General, I agree with the commissioner who stated that we should look at all different kinds of conflicts of interest that any commissioner might have on this issue. I appreciate the commission's time and would hope that you might reconsider and act today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Do I have anybody else who would like to speak? Very good, thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. John Crenshaw, President of the New Mexico Wildlife Federation. I believe I've torn up about 3 different speeches that I've talked about today. This is a surprise. I would simply restate that the Federation and our allies have not changed their mind that this statute was bad, and the former State Game Commission left you a pretty weighty problem, and that they had usurped legislative authority in passing this rule. We had recommended either killing the certifications and denying them, or postponing them, deferring within your authority. and we do support that. And I think that perhaps a thorough review is in order, and we appreciate, especially, Madam Chair, that you continue to be open to openness. It is a refreshing change from some previous years, and that you will keep the record open for this coming hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Crenshaw.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, can you hear me?
Yes, this is on.
My name's Steve Harris. I'm here today representing the New Mexico River Outfitters Association. And we're part of the New Mexico Paddlers Coalition that provided a lot of comment. I was prepared coming in today to make our case in brief in about 3 minutes for denial of the applications, and had some commentary to that end that I'm not going to offer right now. Wait for August 12th. But we are navigators, in fact, on the Pecos River and the Rio Chama, and we have collected documentary evidence and a number of affidavits from voters that we wanted to present in evidence in a familiar kind of evidentiary hearing setting. And I wonder if the commission might consider having such a process during the August 12th, so that we could present some evidence. For example, on the Riverbend West application, if you Google the application, and I don't know if anybody's done that or not, you'll find a real estate offering. And it appears, if this is current information, as if this is a speculation in real estate. And an obvious conclusion might be that this certificate would add substantial value to the real estate offering in question, and that this may in fact be in violation of the state anti-donation clause. And then lastly, what happens if the Supreme Court comes back and says revisit the rule? Is the commission then going to prepare to do what you were obviously contemplating doing at the January 2020 meeting in Las Cruces, which was to initiate a public process of getting comments from affected parties around the state? I was heartened by that prospect and would urge that you consider possibly doing that. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Harris.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, my name is Jason Wiebengay with Wildcat Environmental. I represent Finn Farms. Our client has spent a lot of time and money in this process, as have others. And I'm disappointed because this isn't anything other than a lack of courage on part of the commission. You all have a duty to act. And whether you vote for us or against us, your duty here is to vote. It's not to postpone. It's not to allow people to continue to come up with, facts of this, facts of that. This has been going on for too long. There's no reason to postpone the vote. If later something comes up that would invalidate the vote, you can revisit it at that time. I encourage you to vote. Stand up. Be courageous. Take a stand, yes or no. Let us know where you stand. That's what I ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Do we have any other comments? Good.
Sorry. Thank you. I'm Logan Glassnap, and Madam Chair, thank you for the best attempt on that name. I know it's spelled very stupidly. I'm here representing New Mexico Wilderness Alliance. And I just, to echo Vice Chair's questions, I do urge that the record be kept open and allow for more public comments to be submitted. As you know, we had 10 business days to coordinate a response, which was just enough for us to submit comments. It's not enough for us to organize our members, educate our members, and let them know what's going on. So we'd appreciate the time to get that kind of education and public support going. I'm also curious, and I don't know if this is the right time to ask this, but the comments that have been submitted, it sounds like, will be still kept in the record. It's not going to be a restart of any kind of process. I'm also curious if the AG's analysis will be available to the public during that window, so that we can also submit comments on the conclusions of that office on potential conflicts of interest. All that being said, it's probably pretty clear that we do stand opposed to these certifications and the entire structure set up by the rule, and we are hopeful that the Supreme Court will step in to invalidate the rule and make sure the public waters stay public. Thank you.
Excellent comments. I can't say thank you enough. Do I have another comment?
Yes, please.
Good, thank you.
Good morning, Madam Commissioner, and thank you for letting me speak. Good morning to you, Vice Chair, and also the rest of the commissioners and members of the public. My name is Jennifer Black, and I am the treasurer for the New Mexico chapter of the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. So we have submitted a letter to you all, and I'm just going to read a portion of that. We know that a federal magistrate has ordered you to make a decision on the 5 pending applications, but we believe you owe it to the hunters, anglers, and other members of the public who fund the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish to deny all 5 of these pending applications in order to protect the Department of Game and Fish and your own law enforcement officers from the legal jeopardy they would face for enforcing what your own attorneys, the New Mexico Attorney General's office, have said multiple times is an unconstitutional regulation. The New Mexico Supreme Court is currently considering whether the regulations at issue today are, in fact, unconstitutional. We ask you to respect the High Court in New Mexico and wait for their decision before approving any additional applications under 19.3.22 NMAC. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Anyone else?
Madam Chair, Marco Gonzalez again for the applicants. And just to briefly respond to the request to keep the record open, that would be a violation of the rule. There's no basis for that in the rule to allow public comment to continue to stay open. There are prescribed time periods, and any extension of those time periods from the rule is a violation. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalez. I do not have internet access. I'd like to pull up the Administrative Code 19.31.22. Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. Okay, so I'd like to address the commissioners based on the public comment that we've heard today. You know, my practice has been not to engage during public comment. In order to listen to public comment, we have to listen, okay? I'm not here to engage, argue, agree. That's not the purpose of public comment. It is to listen, okay? So, it's also important that as we proceed with our meeting today, that we acknowledge on the record certain facts, because, as we know, this is a public record. One, we have a duty, our ministerial duty to hold a meeting, right? We're already set for that meeting, but I'm making a very important change. I've shocked you. I've shocked all of the commissioners. This is not a delay tactic. I'm shocking you and I'm shocking the public. It's not a delay tactic. I take integrity very seriously. And if somebody, like a member of the press, is going to call me and question our integrity, mine, or any other commissioner, I will not stand for that. That's why I'm looking to the Attorney General for facts and conclusions and an opinion. I've always said transparency, and thank you, I am very open. I'm an open book. I do think it's important to have a record of this before we go into our August 12th meeting, okay? I don't believe it's going to be attorney-client. I'm going to leave that up to the Attorney General's office. I do not waive attorney-client privileges. That is not who I am. I do not waive attorney-client communications. But I will leave it up to the Attorney General's office to decide on how that will be conveyed. Now, commissioners, there's also, and Director Sloan, Department of Game and Fish. This is a very important thing. And thank you, Madam Commissioner. The question is, would this be in violation of 1931.22.11, paragraph G? And Director, you are our secretary by statute for this commission, so I'm going to defer to you, and I'm also going to defer to the Attorney General. But the way I read that language, and it's not only a paragraph G, but I believe it's in paragraph C, it's that whole section. I do not believe there is a problem in one, postponing to August 22nd to ensure we have a full and complete record in preparation for our August 12th meeting and a vote. Two, if we're going to be accepting new information, that means that the decision or what you were prepared for today, you still have to be open until August 12th, right? In fairness, you still need to be open. And three, I do believe that it is not a violation of 1931.22.11. There is no violation. So I'm going to defer. For the record, I need an answer from the director and from the Attorney General. You can give me the chapter and verse. I just came up with a conclusion.
Madam Chair, I think there are really two questions here. One is the deferment, and I think that you're correct that 1931.22.11G does allow the commission to take other actions. So I think you're fine there. 1931.22.9C says the department shall post on its website the director's recommendation to the commission at least 21 days before a regular special meeting at which the application will be presented to the commission. So again, I think we can repost it, and then there's a comment period. The comment period closes 14 days before the meeting at which the application will be considered for final action. So I believe that we can have a comment period and a reposting and still be within the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Director.
And Madam Chair, I agree with that interpretation. It's a matter of form as to what happens today. When we get to agenda item number, I believe, the 6th, if the meeting is open and you start accepting information, then perhaps you could not take more comment period. But if you are postponing it and not actually starting that portion of the meeting for receiving the information and the content with regard to the applications, then you are fine to just postpone it and then receive more public comment. So it's a matter of form. If you open it, then you cannot accept more public comment, and if you just postpone it, then you can accept more public comment in accordance with 19.31.22.11 sub C and MAC. Thank you.
Okay, commissioners, are we ready to move on to agenda item number 5? Or do you want to continue discussion? Director, Attorney General, Commissioners? We're still on public comment.
Madam Chair, can I just, for my clarity's sake, when we get to item 6, we don't have to have a tabling motion, we just blow past it. There's no more 6. I was a little confused by the AG's comments. She said it was tabled, we will table it, so I don't know if she...
It still exists on the, Madam Commissioner and members of commission. It's still on the agenda because the agenda remains approved, but I believe due to announcements that have been made, when it comes to that agenda, I believe the chair may be tabling it and not opening the hearing.
So you're saying that when we get to that, I have to acknowledge it and table it, and there has to be a motion to table it? Is that what you're saying?
I think it is your discretion to table it. Is that correct?
That's why I'm asking.
I am now very confused too, Attorney General. I think the answer is it's already been tabled in this discussion.
Okay, so you took it out of order. That's fine.
Mr. Director?
Madam Chair, I think I think you're both probably correct. I think that the issue is that because you talked about it before we got to that item, so you may just have to reiterate when we get to item 6 that it was deferred.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Okay, let's proceed on to agenda item number 5. This is consent agenda where there are 2 action items, A and B. This is the approval of minutes from our March 22nd virtual special meeting and the approval of license revocations. Our enforcement arm with the Department of Game and Fish is very important to us, the game wardens, and it's always important to, even though it's a consent agenda item, to carefully review that. So,
Madam Chair, just for the record, it's the minutes from the May 21st, 2021 meeting. That was an error on a prior.
oh, duh, yes, thank you, sir. Okay.
Madam Chair, I just want to thank Jennifer for fixing the error that I caught. And Madam Chair, your vice chair was demoted and I was promoted. And so we got that corrected. So everything's good and I appreciate the department working hard to get it done quickly.
Madam Commissioner, you have never been demoted. I want to put that on the record. When you are a chair or vice chair, you serve, and you serve beautifully. I want to say thank you, Madam Commissioner. You've never been demoted.
Thank you.
Okay, any more discussion on agenda item number 5?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the consent agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I think that was Commissioner Bates. Director Sloan, can we please have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Salazar-Henry.
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez.
Yes.
Commissioner Kramer.
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Vice Chair Vespach.
Yes.
Chair Salazar-Hickey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Director. Okay, we're on agenda item number 6. And for this agenda item, for the record, we've already had discussion on the 1931-2211 meeting on the applications for landowner certification on non-navigable water. Extensive discussion, not only by the commission, by members of the public, and I want to say thank you to everyone. I think that the record will reflect that this item has been tabled and it will be heard on August 12th, 2021 in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And the location director, I think you will work on that and to be determined, but it will be posted on the website.
Correct, Madam Chair. It's
And
likely to be here.
Okay, very good. And I also want to make it very clear for this particular agenda item, Director, you're going to keep the website open on the Department of Game and Fish. We are going to continue to receive comment from everyone for and against the applications. I want to say thank you again to everyone that has already submitted. You're welcome to submit more if you wish, to echo or add new information. You're welcome to do that, or we can get in more information. Because this commission serves with a very open, we're very open to this, and so we're going to wait till August 12th to address those applications.
Madam Chair, the only thing I would add is that because the comment period closed, we turned off that email box, so it may take us a day or two to get that email back up and running. And then by my quick math, it looks like the comment period will close July 29th.
Beautiful. Thank you for that clarification. Excellent.
Madam Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
can we go ahead and issue a new press release on this new open period so that it gets circulated, put it on our social media website so enough people know? I had some folks comment that they didn't even know that we were taking comments, so.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Director Mike Sloan and Tristana Bickford, I know you all do, and Lance Cherry do an awesome job, Colonel, with all of the work that you do. But yes, press statements, press release. I think the press already knows that I do not comment on litigation. And I know other commissioners feel the same way. We will not comment on litigation. So
It's just a notice that it's open again
Absolutely.
for comments and the deadline. And I know the game department staff does a wonderful job on social media as well, so we can push it on that. Then we should not have anybody saying they didn't know.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. All righty, we can move on to agenda item number 7. That is Stuart Lively, overview of wildlife management areas. And I want to say good morning. You know, I always look forward to hearing from you. And I know it's Colonel, correct?
Good morning, Madam Chair. It's Stuart, but my title is the Chief of the Wildlife.
Chief, thank you, Chief. Okay.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members commission, members of the public. It's good to see you all again in person and not have to do this with multiple screens virtually, looking at different things and wondering if you're going to have glitches with the internet or kids butt in while they're with school. So I welcome you to the last commission meeting. There was a discussion of just having an overview of the commission-owned wildlife management areas and what they are, what they're about, a little bit of what we allow on them, what we don't allow on them, and just kind of a general sense of commission-owned areas within the state. So this is a fairly general overview. The wildlife management areas and other properties owned or managed are controlled by the State Game Commission. So the State Game Commission owns them, but the Department of Game and Fish manages those properties. In general, the majority of these properties were purchased for the benefit of wildlife, fish, and their habitats that they depend upon. So they have distinct wildlife values associated with them, and that's why they were purchased in the initial. There are a couple, of course, administrative properties where we have buildings, etc., but the most of this is for wildlife habitat, for the conservation of wildlife. Now, these properties not only provide access for hunting and fishing, they also provide a lot of wildlife associated recreation. And in the last year, we really saw an increase in just general recreation on wildlife areas, people trying to get outdoors, whether it's to see wildlife or just get outdoors to take a break from everything and enjoy what New Mexico has to offer. The Commission owns approximately 200,000 acres across the state of New Mexico, and that's divided up into 97 independently managed parcels. What you'll see there on the map is more or less where those parcels are located, each one of those different wildlife management areas, or a lease that the commission might have. What you'll notice in the eastern southeast with our prairie chicken areas, which I'll get into a few, we just have one demarcation there rather than putting out all of the different prairie chicken areas, because there is a significant amount of those. There's over 30 different separate prairie chicken areas that we kind of make up into one wildlife management area, if you will. But going a little bit more into depth on what those wildlife management areas are or not. So the general wildlife management area that the public, or maybe you all think of, accounts for really almost 72 of those, or 42 what you see there, but if you add in the prairie chicken areas, it's another 30. And that's the Colin Neblets of the world, the Sargent, the Rio Chamas, those areas throughout the state. And they make up approximately 175,000 acres of that 200,000 acres. So the vast majority of the commission-owned properties are those game wildlife management areas that support wildlife conservation. Now, we do also have some wildlife management areas that are managed by other entities. Title is held by the State Game Commission, but management maybe is done by state parks, for example. So where that comes into play is like Eagle Nest Lake or Fitton Lake, where the commission owns title. We've worked out partnerships with state parks on management of more recreation and people, because that's kind of where their forte is, if you will, on the management of personnel, on the landscape, and there's smaller areas. Pecos Canyon is the newest one where we've turned over management. Again, the commission owns the title of the land, but state parks manages kind of the camping and the personnel, the people coming into there. That equates to about 9 properties across the state, or just under 5,500, over 5,500 acres. The commission through time has also purchased separate fishing easements to gain hunter access, for example, on the San Juan, the Rio Chama, etc. So there are fishing easements under that the commission owns the easement to. And then you'll see two kind of other ones where it's a BLM allotment or leases. What those are is when that wildlife management area was purchased, the deeded property also had lease land associated with it. When the commission took over the title to those deeded properties, we also took on the leases on those. So that's state trust land leases are largest. From that, next down is BLM. One of the things that has happened in New Mexico is the commission, the public entity, is not allowed through Forest Service rules to hold Forest Service leases, or you would see there that there would be some Forest Service leases on there as well, because we have attained title, or the commission has title of properties with associated Forest Service leases. And the last two, those local or private leases, just equating to the 466 acres. What that is we lease Springer Lake from the town of Springer, and then we also, if you recall the new Albuquerque office, there's a field that's right next to that. There is a portion of that field we lease from the landowner we are working for migratory birds, specifically cranes. So when you guys are at some of those fall commission meetings, you'll see geese or cranes on there, but that is a lease from that private landowner. So the majority of the land is, like I said, title owned by the commission, about 175,000 acres of it, or a little bit more when you include in where the commission owns title, but then grants management authority to, say, state park. So majority, again, is our general wildlife management areas. I don't have time to go through every single wildlife management area in the state, of course, but I will kind of highlight what happens on some of these wildlife management areas, what kind of different rules or regulations that are associated with it, because they all have unique regulations. And the uniqueness of the regulations really come into play on why the property was acquired in the first place. So for example, the Colon Neblet Wildlife Management Area is our largest wildlife management area in the state, accounting for just shy of 32,000 acres in Colfax County. Where it is really in the Cimarron Canyon, from just outside of Eagle Nest Lake down running towards Cimarron. It was purchased in 1949 specifically for elk management. That was the main purchase of that property, was for the management of elk and other large game conservation at the time. It also was for improved fishing access along the Cimarron River that comes off the Eagle Nest Dam. So public use in that area is highly used from hunting. We do have hunting specific draw hunts, and that's a theme of a lot of our wildlife management areas, but not for all of our wildlife management areas. And we'll get to this more in the next year when we go through the big game rules, where we have select hunts that are just on some of these wildlife management areas, very limited in hunter densities, maybe 5 tags or 10 tags for that one hunt, but we do have some of those specific. Again, we do allow camping, hiking, wildlife viewing on this WMA. It's pretty unique, and where we see a lot of tourism in that Angel Fire, Eagle Nest area, where a lot of tourists go to do and go onto the Colon Neblet for wildlife viewing, hiking, etc. This is another one of these ones where it's a unique, where it has kind of a dual management. And what that is along the canyon where the campgrounds are on Cimarron State Park, that is titled to the commission lands, but managed by the state park. So they help with the camping aspect of it. They help with the fishing access, cleanup, etc. along the Cimarron State Park Canyon. So again, it has a unique aspect in it that's where title is owned. The majority of the department manages of that 31,000, almost 32,000 acres. The department is managing the vast majority of it, but there is sections where it's probably beneficial to have state parks, who's more into the parks, camping, recreation, etc., to manage those aspects of it. Now, we'll get into the rule change or the rule that governs how wildlife management areas are used here in a bit, but just to give you a taste of some of the different aspects of how we do things differently on areas. Because this property was purchased specifically for elk, there is a closure on the Colon Neblet during the elk calving season. So we do not have the public back in on those areas when it's critical time for the species at which it was purchased. So we're trying not to defeat the point of the purchase of the property for what it was for. Other specific kind of rules that are unique to Colon Neblet, there's a big rock face wall that people tend to climb and we're getting into trouble. We closed that from a rock climbing standpoint because of some of the liability issues, etc. And so that has its own unique closure, if you will, on rock climbing because of that. So that's a quick example of one of your wildlife management areas. Kind of shifting gears to a different type of wildlife management area where it's more actively managed, or is what we would call, it's one of our farms. So we specifically farm crops for migratory birds, sandhill cranes, ducks, geese, etc. This was originally purchased in 1963. It became larger through time, kind of putting pieces together. This is the Huey Wildlife Management Area, consisting of just shy of 3,500 acres. It's right outside of Artesia, along the Pecos River. Back before some of these properties like this and Bernardo on the Middle Rio Grande were purchased, a lot of depredation from migratory birds on private crops up and down these river valleys. The State Game Commission at the department at the time felt that, one, they could bolster wild waterfowl populations by having their own managed farms and wildlife areas where it's a good resting area for these species in the winter, because we are in the wintering habitat for many of these migratory birds. And it creates less of a depredation outside of our wildlife management areas. That's the same kind of with the Fish and Wildlife Service at Bosque del Apache, for example, that the reasons on some of those farms were set up. Public use on that is hunting. We do have a limited draw for for deer and turkey on there, fishing, hiking, bicycling in there. And one of the biggest things that's probably happening on there from the general public is wildlife viewing when the migratory birds are in. We'll get tens of thousands of birds that will come in winter on those properties. It's a pretty unique wildlife viewing experience, similar to what you'd see at Bosque del Apache or similar to what you'd see at Bernardo, but down in the southeast part of the state. In the last few years, we've undergone some major improvements on this property, and we're doing the same thing, or getting ready to, at Bernardo and La Jolla. And what that is on kind of water delivery. As we all know, water is a sacred resource, a little bit scarce in the state. So we've changed on how we deal with water and water movement across these farms. We create what's called moist soil units in the wintertime, to where it creates less water usage from a farm aspect or from creating ponding and etc. So we can take advantage of low flows or not have to use as much water as we historically have done. We've upgraded irrigation systems, etc., to conserve that. But the big thing too is working in partnership with Ducks Unlimited to figure out how to move water efficiently across that landscape at the biggest benefit of birds. I'm going to go through just two more kind of wildlife management areas before we get into the rule, but the two ones I want to touch on are the two newest wildlife management areas that were acquired in 2014. The first one being the River Ranch. This is another one where I kind of mentioned where we had leased land associated with deeded land. The commission has about 1,000 acres of deeded land, but this property has 1,800 acres of BLM lease and another 1,100 acres of state land lease. It's in between Deming and Silver City. It's called River Ranch. This one's also very unique in the purchase or the acquisition of it. So the acquisition of this property was really purchased through natural resource damage and assessment funds. What it was Freeport-McMoRan was fined for the killing of a lot of migratory birds in open pits off their mining operations. Those funds that they were fined were then used specifically, or had to be used specifically, for the conservation of migratory birds, specifically non-game birds. They looked to the Department of Game and Fish with those funds, NARDAR, and they used us as an avenue for permanent conservation of those birds. So it did not take Game Protection Fund money, so that acquisition of that property had no Game Protection Fund associated with it. It did have some share with wildlife funds associated with it. We did put some of that forth with it, but the majority of that came through NARDAR. We opened it up to the public in 2019. Really, the biggest use of this property is wildlife viewing. It is, again, especially for a lot of the birders, there's a lot of pass-through birds that are kind of rare sightings in New Mexico. It is in that corridor where we get a lot of small migratory birds on their way, some neotropical migratory birds, et cetera, coming through on that property. A lot of improvements have been done on facilities around there to improve public viewing and access on there. The other one that was acquired about the same time as the River Ranch is the Double E. It's a larger property, but again, similar to the River Ranch, has leases associated with it. Just shy of 6,000 acres of deeded, 3,600 acres of BLM, and just shy of 2,500 acres of state leased. Again, purchased in 2014 using those same funds that I just mentioned. The point and purpose of this property, again, is neotropical or non-game migratory birds. Bear Creek that runs through that has a high diversity of migratory birds throughout the spring migrations and fall migrations, and it's, again, one of the newest WMAs. We did use some state wildlife grant funds to help match those NARDAR funds, but the majority of this purchase was with that damage money, if you will, from Freeport-McMoRan on that. The property is open to the public. Access, though, is through currently through BLM or Forest Service lands onto the property, or if the public can gain access through written permission through a private landowner. But it does connect with other public parcels. It's open to, we do have wildlife viewing, hunting, so anyone that has that drew that GMU for the hunt can go on to that. This is not one where we specifically draw hunters to the WMA, but the WMA is open to hunting to anyone with a license valid in that GMU, for example. So again, the different kind of rules that we show for those properties, depending on how the access is. For this one, it's kind of an access issue in terms of there's not direct access to the property from, let's say, a county road. It's coming off of Forest Service or BLM. That's why we went more with the model of anyone that drew the GMU, this is also open to the public in there. And some of our smaller WMAs, like Water Canyon, is a similar one up in GMU 9. So that's the kind of brief overview on some of the properties that I wanted to show you. I'll get into the rule just in a second, but for you all and anyone in the public, we do have all of our properties listed on our website, you can go by the region, click on the property, shows the access rules that are allowed on the property, a map of it, what's available there from a hunting, fishing, wildlife viewing aspect, etc. We really have 3 rules that govern the use of the wildlife management areas throughout the state. The first one being 1934-5. All that rule does is give the legal descriptions of the wildlife management areas. It states the name of it and the legal description so we can demarcate the boundaries of it through that rule. So the next rule is 1931-10. That's our hunting, fishing, manner, and method. That's our big hunting, fishing, and manner and method rule. It really describes what hunting and fishing activities are allowed on certain WMAs. For example, our Bernardo or La Jolla and the Huey wildlife areas that are migratory bird-centric ones, non-lead shot is mandatory for upland game there. That's described in that rule. It's not described in the wildlife management area rule. It's not described in the use of state game commission rules, but in that hunting and fishing. So that hunting and fishing manner and method rule not only describes just general caliber restrictions, etc., it also talks specifically to certain restrictions on certain WMAs. The main rule that really governs use of our wildlife management areas is 1934-3, the use of state game commission management. So I'll kind of just focus on that right now so you have a perception of what that rule is. It is a permanent rule. That rule was revised last in 2016, so it doesn't come open. It only comes open at the discretion of the commission if they feel like there's needs to be changed. It went through a pretty significant revision in 2016, almost a 2-year process to go through that rule revision. What the big thing that it was trying to do was facilitate more public getting into or accessing our wildlife management areas. Historically, our wildlife management areas were treated as closed unless otherwise opened. So you had to be specifically open by rule for public to access it. The big thing that this rule did was the opposite. It made them specifically open unless otherwise closed. And I'll get into a little bit more details on what the closures are. It was similar to what I discussed in the Cullen Neblet, where we have time-specific closures unique to each area to meet the conservation needs of that property. So that was the biggest change in that rule, was they're expressly now open unless otherwise closed by, mainly what that closure is by director authority. And I'll get to that in just a second. The closures really are trying to just make sure it doesn't go against the intent of the purchase of that property. Again, most of these are for wildlife conservation, so it has some kind of closure or activity restrictions that wouldn't impact the wildlife resources on those. The other aspect that the rule did was eliminate what was called the game permit. We used to have a permit that said if you do not possess a hunting or fishing license or a habitat access and management stamp, you had to have a game permit to access state game commission properties. Gaining access into nature is what it stood for. What ended up happening through that, and we had a lot of complaints on it, is let's say a husband and wife went out to one of our properties. The husband had a fishing license, the wife wasn't a fisherman or an angler, or vice versa. They wanted to go out there together. They went out, let's say someone was reading a book, the other one was fishing. Because that person didn't purchase a game permit, they were in violation of being on the property and were ticketed. So the biggest change that we went through, and across the entirety of the state, we only on average sold less than 1,100 game licenses in a year. So it wasn't really, the administration of the program in terms of selling the permits, et cetera, was almost as expensive as the money that we took in from it. What we changed is now a group of 4 adults have one person in that group must possess a fishing, hunting, or HMAV stamp. Anyone under the age of 18 is exempt from having that, but at least one person in a group of 4 must have that if they're on the property. So it's made it a lot easier from an enforcement standpoint and also from a public understanding standpoint. We don't have the issues of a husband-wife coming onto a property, the husband and or the wife being cited because they don't have a special game permit, but they were there for hunting or they're there for fishing. Some of the biggest ones that's in the rule is when we have a specific draw hunt. Let's say, for example, the Sargent Wildlife Area, we have a bull elk hunt on there, the first hunt, 10 tags. It's pretty hard to draw that hunt. It's a pretty coveted hunt. When we do have those hunts occur, we close that to the general public. Only then the holders of those licenses and up to 3 of their guests can be present on the wildlife management area during the hunt. So during the hunt time frame, we only allow hunters and their guests on it, close the rest of them for the general public. We do allow, we increased the scouting period. It used to be 3 up to 7 day scouting period on our wildlife management areas, and then increase the camping limit from 7 days to 14 days to kind of mirror our federal land management agencies across the state with the same kind of camping terms. I mentioned before kind of the director authority, and what the rule states is the use of commission lands allows the director to approve specific rules that are individually based for the wildlife management area. So if something changed from a resource need, et cetera, the director has the authority to make those rules rather than going through a full rule-making process. Again, those rules need to coincide with the acquisition of the property. Why was the property purchased in the first place? So I gave the example of elk calving closures on the Cullen Nevelet. It also occurs on the Sargent because that property was for that. We also have winter closures, for example, on the Rio Chama Wildlife Management Area outside of Tierra Maria. That area is closed in the winter for wintering deer. That was the initial reason why that property was purchased, and we close it during the winter time during rest, so we don't have access to the public. Those are some of the kind of general closures that are made. It also allows the director to put fire restrictions on the property. If, like in some years where we have high fire danger, we could put temporary fire restrictions on there. It allows the director to determine camping restrictions on properties if necessary, et cetera. So it has made it a lot easier to manage the properties instead of making tweaks to one or the other as we go through if we see a resource management need that needs to be made a change. So again, that's the majority of what that rule change does. That's the majority of the rule, a significant change from prior to 2016. And I'm going to just take the last couple minutes to discuss some of the other activities that occur on our wildlife management areas. One of the biggest things that the department does from a management standpoint is habitat management. Again, these properties were purchased for wildlife conservation and habitat for wildlife. Over the last 5 years, we have directly impacted over 7,000 acres of habitat. When I say directly impacted over 7,000 acres of habitat across the state on it, that's mastication or tamarisk removal, like you'll see up in that upper left-hand corner, where we're using masticators to remove either non-invasive or invasive species, or we're removing overgrown forest in the, like you see in the upper right-hand corner on the Sargent Wildlife, or excuse me, on the Colin Neblett Wildlife Management Area. High risk fire danger. It had a lot of old undergrowth. We went in, cut, piled, burned, slash, and opened up that canopy, put it more into what it would have looked like under normal fire regimes. And in fact, 2 years ago when there was a fire in the canyon, they used the Colin Neblett to back out of as their anchor point, and that's where the fire stopped, is where we've done a lot of these habitat management practices through it. We also do prescribed burn, for example, like what you'll see on the kind of left-hand side panel that's on a prairie chicken area, trying to restore some of the grasslands. Or kind of more recently, working on riparian areas, trying to bring back natural stream flow, or the uplands. That's on the Sargent Wildlife Area. That was actually placed in the spring of last year. That's just one season of growth on that. That's what they call a beaver dam analog, where we don't necessarily have the beaver habitat yet back in that area because the willows are not there, but it's trying to replicate what a beaver would be, re-wet the meadows. Theoretically, we'll bring back the willows to where we can put beavers back in that area again. So a lot of different habitat management standpoints that we've done. We've also planted over 5,700 different trees on the Lattice Gordon, the Huey, etc., for removal of salt cedar. As we remove that non-invasive salt cedar, we're planting back in native plants, native trees, willows and cottonwoods, etc. So a lot of habitat management is a big focus of what we do on these wildlife management areas. Another one is just kind of public access and infrastructure. They all have some kind of infrastructure needs from a management standpoint, whether that's hiking trails, roads, blind, or sightseeing blinds, like you'll see in the lower left, that one overlooking a field when we have, let's say, ducks or geese in that. In the wintertime, it's a public viewing blind so they can see it. But road maintenance, for example, is a pretty significant amount of work. We've improved over 70 miles of roads on our wildlife management areas over the last 5 years. Some of the kind of harder roads, for example, on the Marquez, Red Rock, et cetera, and we've gone through that. We've also cleaned up over 500 tons of trash on our wildlife management areas, or derelict buildings that were old buildings that are falling apart or were falling apart at the time of acquisition in the last 5 years as well. And then just improving public access, building trails, using Youth Conservation Corps to help us build trails to get public maybe away from areas that might be sensitive to wildlife, but also into areas where it would be a good wildlife viewing aspect, et cetera. And then lastly, some of the things that we also do on them is research, education, and outreach. And so a lot of our research projects that we undertake for wildlife management do occur on some of our wildlife management areas. For example, cranes, sandhill cranes, looking at diet studies to see really where sandhill cranes that migrate all the way from, Alaska, Canada, that winter here in New Mexico, what is important food resources for them on the winter range. That was a big project that was undertaken on some of our wildlife management areas, but then also kind of getting together with local groups on the top right corner, youth groups building hunting blinds for the fall or winter season on some of our areas, or just in general discussing habitat management with different agency partners, BLM, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service. And then lastly, a big undertaking of some of our staff in the last year has been working with youth conservation corps. We bring on youth conservation corps every summer. Last summer we were unfortunate couldn't, but we do and have brought those on and trying to train, hopefully, kids that want to look into conservation or working in that and help us maintain our wildlife management areas and help improve. So with that, I would take any questions you all may have.
That was very good, Chief Stewart Wiley. Commissioners?
Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Stuart, I have a question. Is Colin Neblett closed right now as we speak?
Let's see what today's date is, the 18th. I believe it is closed today. It opens, I think, next week. Let me see, it's either June 15th or June 30th. I'm just trying to look at what Colin Neblett is.
The reason I asked...
June 30th. So it's closed until June 30th because of elk cabin.
I had a young lady call me last night and ask where she should go in that area, and I let her to Nubwood.
Madam Chair.
I think I'll text somebody back.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Kramer, now, the majority of it is closed. There is a trail that we keep open for the public in there because of that. And so that's kind of where we went into the director's authority to create rules. We have one section of the trail that we do allow public to just kind of hike through because of
No
that.
camping though?
But no, in the Cimarron State Canyon,
Okay.
there's camping.
I'm good.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Madam Commissioner.
Chief Lively, I guess I have a few questions. We have 190-some thousand acres being managed as primarily for wildlife conservation, or all of it for wildlife conservation, except for, and most of it being purchased with hunting, fishing, and trapping licenses. And so how big is the budget for the wildlife management areas? How much money is spent every year to manage these properties, and how much of that budget is paid for with non-hunting, fishing, and trapping fees?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Salazar Henry. So the budget, from an operating budget standpoint, it's about $1.5 million. It's $1.5 million on the non-farm. So I'm going to pull out the farms just for a second, and I'll explain why. But it's about $1.5 million outside of the farm management. Farms are a little bit more because we do have full-time personnel that live on the farm, so you're paying for the employee salaries as well, and then grain, corn, etc. every year. So the farms probably add another additional $1 million. So probably in the neighborhood of $2.5 million on an annual basis for management of those properties. In terms of dollars and the payment of it, it is over probably 99% of it through Hunter and Fisher. Why I say 99% of it, because some of our management of the money comes through the HAMAV fund, the Habitat Access and Management Fund. There are people, because the requirement that says anyone accessing our properties also need to purchase a HAMAV stamp, 1 out of 4 people. There are some people that just purchase the HAMAV stamp every year to access our properties, but the majority of our operation budgets come out of Game Protection Fund for those properties.
Do we know how many of those HAMAV-only buyers? Do you have a ballpark guess?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Salazar Henry, previously the game permits were in the 1,100 realm. I would imagine it's somewhere in that same ballpark at $4. So we're a very small proportion of our annual operating budget.
It's not like a state parks fee. It's not $4 a day. It's $4 once, and you can have at the wildlife management areas unless they're closed.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Salazar Henry, that is correct. The other aspect in terms of fund and budget, we also, as you all know and you have approved through time, is capital budgets, a capital outlay on habitat improvement across the state. And one of the ones that is the funds that we pull money from almost every other year, $1 million, is the HAMAV fund, specifically to do those habitat restoration projects that I pointed out on our wildlife management areas, which we match with federal PR money. So we spend on average every 4 years $3 to $4 million on habitat management projects outside of our standard operating budget on an annual basis.
What percentage of our wildlife management areas, I know I'm asking you for percent, and I know you're giving me off the top, I'm just curious about, we primarily are managing and doing habitat management work for the benefit of the species, and we are not building trails for hikers, bikers, and all that. That's incidental, correct?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Salazar Henry, there's a combination. The 99, probably 90% or better is for habitat management for wildlife species. As I mentioned, like the youth conservation course, we pay for, let's say, housing or tools or something like that for them to come in, and they build trails for us. So it's a cooperation with them, but it's not us paying directly for trail management. Now we do deal with clearance work because the property is owned in the State Game Commission. We follow the State Historic Preservation Act, etc. So we do spend some money to get trails cleared and do that. So yes, there is some aspect of the annual budget or the capital budget where we work to get that cleared to gain access onto those properties as well.
But it's not specifically for the mountain biking industry or the bird watching industry that we're spending money to build trails just to facilitate that. We're not part of the outdoor recreation plan with our areas.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Salazar Henry, not that specific. Now, it's a multi-use trail, so a hunter might use that, a horseback rider might use it, a mountain biker might use it. It's just helping to improve access within those properties, but not specific to one group.
Like the blinds on Bernardo and those places, the hunters hunting, do we hunt on Bernardo or La Jolla and use the hunters can use those blinds?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Salazar Henry, we have a little bit of both. So on La Jolla, we have hunting blinds specific that are just for hunters, and then on Bernardo, we have wildlife viewing blinds that we've built as well. So it's trying to, we have a tour loop access in that area. It's getting as popular as Bosque in terms of numbers of people that go and watch the birds, but we've built blinds, wildlife viewing blinds for the general public to come in and watch some of those cranes or snow geese or whatever it is migrating.
Is there outside grant opportunities to be able to tap into to go ahead and facilitate and to pay for the blinds and for wildlife viewing and the trails for hikers? And is there another opportunity somewhere with maybe now with Land and Water Conservation Funds? I don't know. There's some new stuff coming out all the time.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Salazar Henry, yes, I think there's some other avenues that we could look into to tap into if we're going to further endeavor into some of those, I think, as well. I think a lot of it is, those are still PR eligible projects because the property's main purpose is conservation of those wildlife resources. So we do use a lot. I think there's going to be times if we ever get PR limited that we're going to have to look at outside either federal funds or other grant opportunities to help with some of those other projects that are outside the scope.
Thank you, Chief Lai. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Excellent questions. Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Madam Commissioner. Okay, I think before we move on to the next agenda item, and I think we'll wrap up. Thank you, sir. Director, this might be a good time to take a break. I noticed that it's 10:33. I suggest we have maybe a 10-ish minute break. We will resume exactly at 10:45. So. Director, Commissioners, I think we can move to agenda item number 8. This is the River Otter overview. Do we have Kurt Patton and Chief Stuart Lively?
Madam Chair, yep, we're both here. I'll go ahead and kind of start in on the presentation and then let Kurt kind of join in as well. So I think part of some of the reason why we're in front of you today is there's been kind of a discussion, if you will, around potential river otter reintroduction on the Gila River watercourse. I think you all have been aware of that and heard some of the discussions on it. But I think what we wanted to do first too is give a little bit of an overview of the population that was started recently in New Mexico, kind of give you a perception of that. There's a little bit of takeaways from that, I think, that we can use if we look to otter restoration across different areas of the state. So I'll kind of go into the details of the river otter in the Rio Grande population, and then I'll let Kurt kind of take over on the sensitive fish species that are down in the Gila, and then we'll both be available for questions if you have it. So again, like I stated, I want to kind of give a little bit of background on the Rio Grande population. So Rio Grande river otters were reintroduced into the Rio Grande with 33 individuals starting in 2008. We introduced 16 males and 17 females. 10 of those in 2008, 13 in 2009, and another 10 in 2010. So over the course of 3 years, 33 animals released into the Rio Grande on the Rio de Pueblo de Taos. Now, there was an effort by really Taos Pueblo and a little bit of cooperation with the Department of Game and Fish on that initial reintroduction effort. Distribution and that timing since release has really occurred from up in Colorado. So we've had river otters recorded up north of the Colorado-New Mexico line on the Rio Grande. And then we've had them as far south as Cochiti Lake. We do know distribution has gone as far down there. That doesn't mean the core of that population is in there, but we have had distribution in there. We've also had river otters up into about Abiquiu Dam area, and then up in the Red River, Rio Hondo, Red River, some of those different tributaries off the main Rio Grande and Budo, those kind of tributaries. But the majority of the population, the core, if you will, is probably just south of Pilar, just north, and then moving north probably to the distribution of north of Red River a little ways. So that's kind of our core population, if you will, right now. Again, there is otters distributed throughout there. In 2018, Share with Wildlife project was undertook to look at two different things, kind of the distribution and population estimates of that population, and two, kind of the diet, information on dietary aspects of the introduced population. So I'll discuss the demographics aspect of it. And the way they did that is they visited latrine sites or where the otters use the restroom on the side of banks, latrines, and they were able to collect the scat and then type it to an individual through DNA. So they take the DNA out of it, then they could do basically a capture recapture. So without actually handling the animals, if you capture their DNA through their fecal samples multiple times through there, you could build capture history profiles to then estimate what the population size was. They estimate that core population at approximately 100 animals. Really, it was kind of higher confidence intervals, but between 61 to 176 individuals across that core that I just described. Probably anywhere right now, if you look from 2018 from then, probably around 200 individuals or so in the Rio Grande population. So an introduction success, I guess, is part of that. However, because we were using DNA to get at population estimates, we also could look at DNA from a genetic standpoint and what the what the current population was in terms of genetic viability. That's an important aspect of any kind of reintroduction of animals, is you want to ensure that you have genetic viability. What they did find on that is that the introduced otter population has lost 20 to 26% of its diversity from its source population. So what it's saying is it went through a severe bottleneck, or where you had a genetic bottleneck to where they are not as diverse as their source population. There is the potential for inbreeding impacts and inbreeding coefficients increasing through time to where it manifests through something like lack of survival or less production of pups or something. It's not being manifested now, but you cannot gain genetic diversity unless you introduce new animals. So that was the biggest thing that they showed, was this population isn't necessarily connected to any other otter population in the United States right now. Maybe when it gets closer to the headwaters of the Rio Grande in Colorado, but Colorado didn't reintroduce river otters into the Rio Grande. They did on the Plata and over into the San Juan. Otters to get across it is possible for otters to get across the Continental Divide into the Rio Grande, but really the way we took at that was we had a genetic diversity issue because of this severe bottleneck from the initial start that we needed to try to fix now while the population was small. If you wait until the population is large, it's much harder to change the genetic makeup of the population. So over this last year, we ended up capturing 9 animals from Louisiana, a completely different source population than where these all came from the Puget Sound in Washington, and introduced those 9 individuals into the Rio Grande population this winter and this spring to try to reverse some of those trends in the genetic diversity. So again, you couldn't improve it without some kind of man-made manipulation introduction into there, because it's not connected to any other known populations right now. We think that 9 it will definitely help improve the situation, but probably we'll need to get another probably 9 or 10 or so more. It just is to buffer the effects through time, because this will be an isolated population, not connected right now. So I think that was one of the biggest things that we found as a surprise, was that even though the source stock, the founding population, was 33 individuals, we still lost in the course of less than 10 years 20% to 25% of the genetic diversity from their source population. So it really kind of goes on to say that we should have started from multiple sources instead of just the Puget Sound population, and probably gone into a larger reintroduction of numbers, so we didn't get that initial genetic bottleneck. You can't control breeding in the wild. Animals tend not to breed the related individuals, but when you're capturing otters out in the wild, you don't know if you're capturing brother and sister, or if you're capturing completely unrelated animals to start your population. So, of those 33 individuals, we didn't know the relatedness of those when they were first brought in. So we could, just that capture of individuals could have created a bottleneck from the very start. Buffer that by putting more animals in is kind of is the way that you get away from having some of those. One of the other aspects, and why this is kind of important and why I'm kind of discussing, I'll kind of wrap up before I turn it over to Kirk, is lessons learned from this is what do we learn if we're going to start another population? I think the biggest thing we found from that is don't start small, don't allow genetic diversity to just decline significantly right away. If you're going to go into a reintroduction project, it should be at scale to where you're not having to deal with manipulations through introductions frequently to counter the impacts of loss of genetic diversity. If you can do it right from the start, that's probably the best. It's kind of where that comes in from a lessons learned, I guess. One of the other things that I mentioned, I'll do it real quick because this is put out there, is diet. What do otters eat? What do they consume? What are potential impacts? They are a predator, and they have the potential to have impacts. What I do want to point out on this, though, this is very important, is that this is frequency of occurrence. So how often that type of prey shows up in a scat. It does not get at the quantity. So that's an important aspect to understand. So it shows up in the scat. It may mean that it's only 2% of their diet, even though it shows up in 66% of their scats, if that makes sense. So it's showing up in the scat a lot, but it may not consist of the majority of their diet. And part of the way this was done, it was using scats, and so digestibility plays an important role into what is occurring in scats. For example, crayfish may be showing up in a higher proportion just because the digestibility of scale or the exoskeleton on a crayfish is harder than maybe the soft scale of a trout, for example. Small scale fish may show up less, large scale fish may show up more, such as carp, etc. So I think it does show that they consume multiple prey sources, with the most occurrence coming up on these Rio Grande otters on crayfish or fish. That fish kind of was broken down a little bit more into suckers, and this is where Kirk's going to help out because I'm really bad with fish. Suckers, trout, etc. But for the majority on the fish, the occurrence, again, not the quantity, but occurrence was kind of split pretty evenly between the trout and kind of slower moving fish like suckers, etc. So again, occurrence, it doesn't get at diet quantity. And I think that's an important thing that we would want to look at. There's some research across different parts of river otter ranges that are now getting at more of quantity. What is energetics? What is the need? What are they actually consuming on an energetic basis in a quantity? So I think that'd be the next step from a diet perspective that we want to look at. So again, before I turn it over to Kirk, I think the biggest thing, lessons learned, like I mentioned, that's small. Even though 33 animals seem like a large start for the population, we really found out from a genetic standpoint that that was small from a founding population. It really did bottlenecks way more significantly than we thought. Since 2018, that was done 20 to 25%. That included 3 more breeding seasons before we brought in otters. Is it up to 28%? Is it up to 30% now, loss of genetic diversity from the other? We don't know because we're not going to go back. We haven't gone back in. We'll wait until we reintroduce more otters from the Louisiana population into this completely different population of river otters into this, and then go back and look at loss of genetic diversity. It should improve because you brought in new individuals. So the genetic diversity of the population should improve if they are breeding and contributing to it. You know, for example, other states, Ohio, I think when they started their population, put 168 otters into the river system, whereas Missouri, when they started theirs, it was 854. So orders of magnitude more otters being put in to start their populations than what we saw here. And I think that plays into a little bit of what Kirk's going to talk about. The Gila River is an isolated river. It will be another isolated population not connected to another river otter population. So it will take whatever we put in there or whatever we will put in the future would be us controlling the genetics. It will not be connected to another population. The nearest connection would probably be the Verde River, which connects into the Gila River to the west of Phoenix. So we're talking a significant distance of dry, probably river, before you would ever have connectivity to another river otter population. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kirk to kind of discuss some of the sensitive fish species and concerns that I think are brought forth in the field.
Thanks, Stuart, and good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. It's great to be back in front of you in person. I have to say the first presentation I ever thought I would give back in person would not be about river otters, but you know, and it's logical for me to do this because one of the primary prey species is fish. And so, you know, as we talk about expanding these reintroduction efforts into other basins, it makes sense to kind of do some comparisons about what we're getting into potentially. And so what I've done today is just taken a whole bunch of data we have about the presence of certain fish in areas, the long-term abundance trends, biomass, all of that, and tried to boil it down in 4 or 5 slides for quick consumption. So if there's any specific interest in some of these data sets, some of them are dating back to being sampled every year since the 1980s to present, in particular in the Gila. So there's a lot of information out there. So this first slide is on the right is, and my apologies to the public, I didn't realize that what screen we would be dealing with today. But on the right there is the Upper Rio Grande. There's right down here is Coach D Lake, which Stuart mentioned, that the core of the river otter presence is somewhere up here in the Pilar area. And the red lines, which can't be seen very well, are Rio Grande cutthroat trout distribution in New Mexico. These are relatively isolated populations. Some of them connect directly to some of the primary tributaries of the Rio Grande. Also within that core habitat of the Rio Grande, there's Rio Grande chub and Rio Grande sucker. Both of those species are species of greatest conservation need under state wildlife action plans, but they're a smaller bodied fish. They don't really get that large, so I wouldn't necessarily identify them as a likely prey species, but certainly they're present and could be consumed by river otters. Moving over into the Gila, I think it's a different story. There are 4 listed fish species in the Upper Gila in New Mexico. The first of those is Gila trout. Again, like Rio Grande cutthroat trout, they are more isolated into some of the cold water, headwater reaches of the Upper Gila. But then spike dace and loach minnow are quite abundant in our portion of the Gila River. They are both endangered under the Federal Endangered Species Act. They are small-bodied fish, potential prey items, but it's not really identified as a likely prey species. In the purple stream segments, we've identified round-tailed chub, and it's an interesting taxonomic story about what is or is not a round-tailed chub. But currently, round-tailed chub are not listed under the Endangered Species Act. They're being reviewed by the Fish and Wildlife Service as we speak. It's considered to be whether or not they should be listed. But round-tailed chub, at least in the Gila, were formerly just split up into 3 different species. There was round-tailed chub, Gila chub, and headwater chub. And so it was revised, the taxonomic revision, long story. Nonetheless, they are currently collapsed into 1 species, and so I've just depicted round-tailed chub here. But in this one small area right here, this is Turkey Creek, if you can see that.
Mm-hmm.
That is under the Endangered Species Act. It is a population of Gila chub, which is considered endangered under the Endangered Species Act. Up here in the Forks area, there are some headwater chub, again depicted as a round-tailed chub, but nonetheless, they're in there. They are larger bodied fish and could be a potential prey species. Also worth noting is that there are 2 species of greatest conservation needs suckers, desert sucker and Sonora sucker, large-bodied fish, and they're still pretty abundant, and I'll show you some data on that here in a minute. So, looking at the Upper Rio Grande, there's a Rio Grande cutthroat trout in the area. There are some other sensitive fish species. Moving to the Gila, in particular to fish, there are a number of sensitive fish species. So that graph there is a long-term trend of the mean annual discharge of the Rio Grande and the Gila River Basin. In the Upper Rio Grande, that's taken from the Embudo Station, if you're familiar with that area. Your annual discharge is somewhere 500 to 1,500 cubic feet per second. Moving down to the Gila, it's more in the 75 to 400 range of cubic feet per second. So what this equates to is a larger river system, smaller river system, a desert system down in the Gila. But it also equates to different sizes of habitat for fish in those areas. The reason I mention that is, one, it's just a habitat component, but also it relates to the data, some of the data I'm going to present to you in a minute. That upper right picture is us surveying the Upper Rio Grande in the same area that otters currently exist. It's a larger river system. We have to float it with a raft system hooked up with an electric fishing system. you're floating down the system at at the mercy of the river, and there's a limited electrical field that you can put out. So I think, the data I'm going to present between the Rio Grande and the Gila, I think it's informative from a community standpoint and a biomass standpoint, but it's not necessarily good to compare between the two as far as what is the biomass here and what is the biomass here, the abundance here. So moving to the Gila, it's a smaller system. We can wade in those areas, we can seine in those areas, so I think we capture a larger proportion of the species or of the fish that are in that system. So again, my apologies for the small print. The Upper Rio Grande, this figure up here, the top left, is a relative abundance histogram of the large-bodied fish in the Upper Rio Grande. The story there is that the Upper Rio Grande is predominantly a non-native sport fish dominated community. Anything from brown trout to rainbow trout that we stock, white sucker and common carp are that highest peak there is white sucker. They are not native to the Rio Grande drainage. Common carp are not native to the continental United States. And then moving down to the Gila, there is, as far as the entire fish community, there's a relatively intact native fish community. Larger bodied fish, you start to get some non-natives moving in, like yellow bullhead, smallmouth bass, flathead catfish, channel catfish. But again, I mentioned Sonora sucker and desert sucker. They are, from a relative abundance standpoint, they are quite abundant in areas throughout the Gila Basin. And then another way you can look at fish communities, and I guess there's many different ways, but you can look at biomass, and that's essentially an indice of how many pounds or how many kilograms of fish you have in a unit length of stream or an area of stream. And again, the upper left corner is a biomass estimate for large-bodied fish at 3 sites, one in the West Fork, I believe, the Middle Fork Gila, and then the Gila River, we're talking about the Rio Grande. The Taos Junction Bridge area, the Embudo area, and then up near the Colorado state line. Again, in the Rio Grande, the biomass is dominated by non-native white sucker and common carp to a significant degree. Moving down into the Gila River Basin, again, your biomass is still, you have your 2 large native sucker species, that being Sonora sucker and desert sucker, being quite abundant from a biomass standpoint. And then you start to see other non-native fish pop up, like common carp or flathead catfish. But in a lot of those areas, that might be 1 or 2 large fish, not an abundance of fish. So that's all I have. And again, I think there's a significant amount of information. We have large data sets that we could look into more. But I think the story here is that these are 2 different systems. The Upper Rio Grande is a large river system dominated by non-native sport fish, dominated by non-native fish that the non-native sport fish can consume. In the Gila River Basin, we have a higher prevalence of sensitive fish species where we've been working for decades to try and improve their status. There's been some insults to that system through the years, whether it was the whitewater baldy fire and these catastrophic floods going through. We're experiencing a warm, dry summer. There's been drought, and especially in that desert area. So I think as we start to think about other areas, it's important to consider, what sort of conflicts or how we start to split our resource management in these different river systems. So, thank you. That's all I have.
That was very good. Thank you. And can I say Chief Kirkpatrick?
Madam Chair, yes. or Kirk is fine.
And yes, okay. Commissioners, I have 5 comments from the public, so I'd like to hear from the commissioners before I bring in people from the public. Commissioner?
Madam Chair, I got a question for you, Kirk. I noticed on your first map, I don't know if you can scroll back way at the beginning on the right-hand side, and that's news to me. There, I guess near Conhilon, you're saying there's a little section up there of Rio Grande Cutthroat?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Lopez, yes, there is a small population of Rio Grande Cutthroat trout upstream of Congelone Lakes, in Congelone Creek.
Is there any, like, let's see, west of that, like towards the Trout Lakes, the way up that are in Hopewell, or?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Lopez, they're not up towards Trout Lakes we are working on one small population in the Hopewell area, and then there's a couple up in kind of near the Cruces Basin, but not actually in the Cruces Basin.
Do you know, like, how big the population is? Is that, like, particularly there in the Cahilon area?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Lopez, I believe that is a 2 or 3 mile reach of river, very small creek. I suspect it's probably a population of a few hundred Rio Grande Cutthroat trout.
All I have.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Vice Chair?
Madam Chair, well, thanks first. I think it's really exciting to see the department, one, engage so proactively on the Rio Grande population. It's awfully fun to go see those otters. Yeah, I seem to get really lucky every time I go there. They're right there and run into them. And I mean, we're in the business of restoring wildlife and maintaining healthy wildlife populations. And so I just really appreciate this. And I had a couple questions on the Rio Grande population first. One, Chief Viability, do you expect they'll continue to move downstream in the Rio Grande? I mean, will we be seeing them through Albuquerque and that sort of thing over time?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vesbach, I mean, they definitely have the capabilities from a physiological standpoint to move over the dam, Cochiti, and go down there. From a fish standpoint, it's going to be dependent on prey. And so if there's enough prey resources for them to sustain, then I would say yes. I think there's probably enough in that reaches probably through the Albuquerque area. I'd look to Kirk on that more, but given the size of the system, and like Kirk said, a lot of the non-natives that are in there, especially carp, suckers, etc., I would say yes, it has the potential to. I would suggest though that it's going to be a while. I think we'll see, because we're not anywhere near carrying capacity or densities that we see great expansions. I think we'll see more of a filling of the reaches from probably White Rock to Cochiti Lake would be my guess, is where we'll see more otter presence through time. In fact, this spring we had some more reports of otters in there, so maybe we have a breeding population that now established in that reach of water, and I would suspect that's where we'll see the biggest gains. I also would suspect we'll see gains on the Chama River too. Before down below Cochiti Dam, I would imagine the Chama River has the greater potential for colonization before south of Cochiti. Part of that's human disturbance as well too.
And then a follow-up question on that. Bringing new individuals into the population, I mean, it seems like it may be hard for them to establish a breeding position to help influence the genetics quickly. I mean, should we be looking to uncolonized areas as well for helping to improve that genetic diversity?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vesbach, I think two things. Wildlife in general typically do not breed with relatedness. They're able to detect some of the relatedness. They will if they're forced into it. So some of the forced into is because of what individuals we introduced. The new individuals that came in, I don't see a issue with establishing a breeding position. I really think they're, the same size and or maybe bigger, probably. Some of these Louisiana otters that we brought in, we're already a generation or two down the road with the Rio Grande population. They're probably a little bit bigger than some of those, so that's not a concern. The other thing you mentioned, would it be good to put them in other areas? The problem you face then at that time too is if there's just one or two, let's say one otter from the Rio Grande and two from Louisiana, you bottleneck that one. So we wanted to put them in the core to try to distribute genetics as much as possible and fix that issue. I do think if we see establishment of a smaller population in the Cochiti area, it has been a discussion, if we do have a breeding population in there, maybe putting one river otter from Louisiana in there would be beneficial. But we obviously know there's connectivity up into the current core population. I don't think they didn't move down, isolate, and then establish their own. I think there's still connectivity up and down the whole Rio Grande corridor.
Thank you. And then I appreciate the lessons learned from the Rio Grande. I'd add one. I think commissions can get caught in analysis paralysis on things like this and looking at all the things that could potentially go wrong. We need to highlight those. But it's Cochiti Pueblo that kind of jumped out there and sort of made this help make this happen and kind of cut through. And so, you know, the commission is there now. We're supportive of the Rio Grande. The department is doing great work, but I think that continued as we look to the Rio Grande, there's a little bit of a lesson there too, where like, you know, let's look at, make sure we're analyzing everything, we move forward. But I'd like to see the commission kind of continue to move forward and investigate this and not get caught up on all the what could go wrong too early and move forward. So I guess on that question, you know, we have the Rio Grande is a bigger river system. It has a different suite of fish species, but Chief Patton, could you talk a little bit about, you know, if we move forward with this, how would you analyze the Gila more like, say, looking at the Verde River? Does that have the same Sonoran and desert sucker species? How might we go about analyzing the likely impact? How might we monitor otters if they were reintroduced there, to monitor whether they are having a positive, negative, neutral impact on, you know, species of greatest conservation need? What would the process look like for us to get to a very informed decision on that reintroduction question?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vestbach, I think there's about 3 different answers to that, so I'll try and take them in part. One of them, I think I'm going to flip over to Stuart about how you would go about monitoring otters. I could handle the fish questions. We have, like I said, a data set. It's dated back, was started by one of our earlier fish biologists back in the 80s, and it's been done using almost the identical methods for a long time. And I think that data set is one of the best I am aware of for, you know, in New Mexico. It's a great data set for detecting long-term trends in fish communities. The power of it to detect differences in a particular species is not all that great, but it is a good data set as far as what's going on. You know, what's driving a lot of the Upper Gila fisheries are things like catastrophic wildfire and the flooding, drought. We've seen significant changes in the communities in some of these areas because of that. The one consistent thing that I've seen in the data set is that Sonora sucker and desert sucker have always been pretty consistent in their abundance. You know, during dry years, there will be pools that they're not completely isolated, but these fish are stacked up in those areas. And so, you know, so I think part of the question is, or part of the answer is, how would we go about detecting whether this is having an effect or not? And I think it would be difficult to do so because of these climatic sort of effects on the system and what's going on with those fish. You know, I think, you know, moving back to Stuart's, you know, how I'm going to punt to Stuart, is the question of monitoring the otters. You could, you know, do studies, again, scat studies to see what sort of fish they're consuming. You know, I think the challenge there is by the time they're there, and if they are having an effect you think is going on, they're there for a long time, or for potentially forever. So I don't know how we would go about monitoring it in order to have some sort of adaptive management approach in that case. So I'll punt over to Stuart.
Just one more on that before we punt to Stuart, Chief Patton. The Verde River, does it have these same sucker species? Or they also have river otters?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vestbach, yes, they are present in the Verde system. My understanding of the fisheries in the Verde is, and I don't think it's necessarily related to otters, but there still are persistence of smallmouth bass. You hear about people going and fishing in the Verde. There have not been, that I'm aware of, spike bass and or loach minnow in the main stem Verde for a long time. So, you know, the idea of consumption of some of the larger predators, freeing up the predation that's going on those native fish, and then them taking off, I don't think that's happened. But there still are Sonora sucker and desert sucker, to my understanding, in that system.
Okay.
And there are larger tributaries that, you know, Arizona Game and Fish has restored.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of giving the commission, you know, more information for an informed decision, would you see that as an analog river to, you know, help us analyze what the impacts might be? And, you know, in terms of the process, you know, of how we get to a decision, how we do an assessment, that type of thing.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vestbach, I don't necessarily think it's a good analog, because we have a relatively intact community up there, like Spike Dace and Loach Meadow, like roundtail chub in some of these areas. I do not believe roundtail chub persists in the Verde River at this time, so we're kind of at a different baseline.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vesbach, in terms of otter monitoring, you know, otters, we're pretty good at monitoring a lot of different species of animals, however we want to do it. You know, the biggest thing from us would be, are we successful in a reintroduction? And success, kind of like we're talking about the Rio Grande, we were successful in establishing a population and seeing growth. We were unsuccessful in mitigating the genetic consequences of it, and I think we learned lessons from that. So from a monitoring perspective, otters alone, and then I'll get a little bit into the fish aspect of it too, is we would want to ensure that we're having survival and reproduction, right? And so success to us is a self-sustained reproductive population that doesn't need a lot of human management and doesn't need us to go in and introduce new individuals every so often to keep mitigating potential negative impacts. We would want to see somewhere in the growth rates of 10 to 15%. I think that's about what we saw on the Rio Grande, is in that 12 to 15%. The way you could do that is, one, you can mark them and either individual based marking, pit tags or something like that, or they're not like a elk or deer, you can't put a radio collar on them, but you can insert transmitters into them. So you can insert a transmitter into them and track them either through telemetry, aerial or ground, or those kind of things, to see movement patterns and those kind of things. I think that the thing that would be very important, and again I go back to the Rio Grande, is you would want to do it at scale, so you don't go into the first breeding season with so few animals that you genetically bottleneck at the first breeding season. So I think you'd want to bring in a diversity of individuals from different places so you don't have that issue, and you'd want to bring in a sufficient number, especially if you're going to radio mark them with implants of transmitters. High mortality rate on that. It's not like a radio collar that you put on, very low mortality rate. We do see, because it requires surgically implanting those, we see a higher mortality rate now. It's just the fact of the way it is. So I guess that would be a question of, is there a need to actually radio monitor the otters, or is the goal to establish a self-sustaining otter population? I think the goal would be to establish a self-sustaining otter population. In that case, I would put in multiple otters in the first year to try to really establish that population and start it off correctly, or right, I guess, from a genetic standpoint. The question comes in is, what is the impact of the prey, right? And so it's similar to questions that we've had on wolf elk impacts, and how do we try to research that? A lot of expense that we've been, is we have between Arizona and New Mexico, we have 500 GPS collars on elk right now, trying to look at what are those potential impacts. Are we seeing impacts? Are we not? So I think it'd be something that we'd have to undertake from a fisheries standpoint as well, a new methodology that's probably going to cost quite a bit of money to undertake. How do we get at, are we going to go pit tag thousands of fish? Are we going to look at densities through pit tag monitors across the streams to look at, did we change density? Did we see otters move into there and change that density or not? So I think that would be if the concern is about endangered fish species and the potential impacts to that, I guess I would set up a protocol way before we even start to really get at something robust that you could detect change. You might be in the hundreds of thousands or more to detect that change, because you might have to, you know, I don't know, a power analysis might say you have to pit tag 10,000 fish in that system to detect a 5% decrease in the population. We'd have to look into some of that data, but that would be my recommendations from a monitoring standpoint if we really want to get at and try to figure that out. We'd also probably want to look at, if we're worried, more in-depth diet analysis from the otter population as well, not just a presence or this is an occurrence in the fecal sample. What is the actual consumption? What is consumption rates? And have someone on that, probably a graduate student working on that. So I guess that's the way I look at it, is if we're going to go into it, I wouldn't go into it tiptoeing, because then you're always trying to back fix it, I guess, with the number of otters. I would go into it with confidence that you feel that you can restore a self-sustaining population, knowing that this population is not going to be connected, probably not connected in the next 50 years. And so it'll be an isolated otter population in terms of a desert otter population.
Thank you, I appreciate that too. I feel like, you know, what I'd personally like to see is this get to, if you're going to do it, here's how you do it right. You know, and so if we can kind of keep that discussion moving and keep that analysis going, that's what I'd like to see, is we get towards. Thank you.
Yes, Madam Commissioner.
Stuart and Kirk, thank you so much for presenting this information. We've all had conversations with other individuals that are very much interested in river otter reintroduction down south. I personally have a lot of concerns given the number of endangered or threatened species in the system, so I appreciate that graphic, Kirk, because it tells a story in itself. Can you explain to me when the decision was made to reintroduce otters up north into the Rio Grande, what factors were considered? I mean, were you thinking, well, if we reintroduce them up here, they're never going to get to the cutthroat trout, or we have enough cutthroat trout to sustain them, cutthroat trout are endangered, blah, blah, blah. Can you explain that? What the factors that were considered?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, Salazar, Henry, I think one point of clarification too is Taos Pueblo did reintroduce the otters.
Okay.
Now there was it's not to say that the department wasn't involved, so I want to make that clear. I think one of the biggest things that looked at the different systems is there river otter habitat first? Are flows sufficient? Are we going to see that? And I think the Rio Grande presented itself as higher flow, higher density of fish. Was there concern from endangered fish? A little bit, but as you look at that chart in Kirk's on the right-hand graph, those headwaters where Rio Grande cutthroat are is not really otter habitat. You may get occasional river otters coming into there, looking at it, checking it out, but that's not high flow, high density water areas. The main channel of the Rio Grande is not an issue from a sensitive fish species issue. So I don't think that was really considered much there because it's not, they're not there. It's not an issue. There was never the thought process of, are they really going to get into those headwaters and take out a Rio Grande cutthroat trout population? Probably the one concern, and it's a concern we still hear today, and it happens, is getting into the hatchery. And so when those river otters find hatchery fish or find a hatchery, they can have a pretty significant impact on hatcheries. There's ways to fence around it and deal with it, but that's probably, from a sport fish concern, I would say that was the biggest issue. It was not a native fish issue concern in the Rio Grande.
Okay. Is there, looking at the river system down in the southwest, it's markedly different than what's happening up north. And is there any place in the southwest there where you would say, I can go ahead and put some otters in, they're not going to be able to reach these areas that are with all these sensitive species, and in doing so, would that just isolate that population? I mean, there's a big difference between flow and habitat differences between the north and the south. And my primary concern here is the threatened and endangered fish and any candidate fish that are in the Gila system, because I mean, I spent 25 years with the game department, and we were trying to restore Gila trout the entire time I was there, and we just barely got to the point where you can fish for them. And so putting otters, in my opinion, into a system as with all those sensitive species without knowing up front the potential impact, for sure, how much they're going to eat of these sensitive species. I would hate to learn that on the back end, that we've already decimated a population in a stretch of the river because we're just finding out afterwards after they poop out what they ate. And so,
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner Salazar, Henry, I think that's where I kind of went into the discussion on, it's going to take a lot to try to ascertain as you go through it. Probably, and I'm not the best in terms of trying to get at prey populations of fish, but I would recommend you really need to get at density and change in density, right? And so there's other environmental factors that probably change density of fish in there, whether it be floods, high water floods after fire, but you're gonna have to mark a significant amount of fish, in my opinion, to even get at a detection of, 5% decrease in some of these sensitive fish species may be a lot different than a 5% change in an elk population with wolves, right? That's not as much of a concern. We have 100,000 plus elk in the state. You may not have that much there. 5% change in a population on one fish species might be a lot. But a monitoring of that population as you have otters in there is going to be, in my opinion, pretty critical to detect those changes so you could adapt while they're in there. I guess I would, and I'll let Kirk add on if he, from a fish perspective, if I were worried from a prey standpoint, which there is concerns from a prey standpoint there, I would not put them right on top of your biggest concerns. I would move further down the river system, I guess, is in my
Can
opinion.
you show me where on the map you're
I think it's off the map,
Oh.
personally, or maybe it's,
That's good.
or maybe not. The burrows are right there. So.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Salazar Henry, once you get down in we call it the lower Gila in New Mexico. It's still the upper Gila as far as the whole river system. But down near Red Rock, down in the Sunset Diversion area, you start to see some of the threatened or endangered or sensitive fish species drop out, and there is some abundance of channel catfish and those sorts of species and non-native species. I don't know enough about river otter movements to say whether they get there and there's not enough food for them and then they move up, back up into the bird area or back up into the Gila Cliff Valley or farther up into the Forks area. I can't say, but that would be an area where there's not an abundance of large-bodied sensitive fish in that area.
Well, I guess to put it in another way is that, once we make a decision to introduce 150 otters, there's no going back from that. At that point, we are maybe in damage control with all these other endangered fish. Can you tell me, do you know what it would take to get the feds to even say, yeah, let's go ahead and do this and see what happens to all this here? I mean, the consultation process. And could we even get them to agree that it's just a great idea to introduce river otters into this system? And I'm asking for your opinions on the could we get them to agree part.
I'm sure Commissioner Salazar Henry, I'll go first and then kind of go to Kirk, because I think we're going to have to go through a biological opinion, and I think you're going to have to come up with some kind of a monitoring program so you can detect a change before the change is too late in terms of sensitive fish. I would imagine that the service may impose some kind of those restrictions on us to say you are going to need to detect a change of 5% in the population or 6% in the population of this fish species, and then have to mitigate after the fact if you detect it. So does that mean removing otters? Does that mean doing something else with otters? I don't know what the negotiations would be, but if I was in the service's shoe worrying about an endangered species, prey species, that's probably how I would approach the situation. You need to show me a plan that can show to me that your plan moving forward can detect it and can mitigate it before we see a further decline. So I guess I would imagine some kind of scenario from Fish and Wildlife Service, and that's just speaking broadly from a predator-prey, endangered prey standpoint. Kirk might have a better perception on the specifics of the fish there.
And Madam Chair, Commissioner Salazar Henry, Stewart's spot on. We would have to go through full-blown Section 7 consultation. We routinely do this for various projects. The things I would add is that we would likely have to do monitoring of all these species probably beyond what we do now, because he's right, we would need to detect changes and be able to say what those changes are. One other thing that would probably come along with that are some sort of conservation measure or mitigation measure, which would say you need to do X, Y, and Z for these other species in order to make sure that they do not further decline. And it's always difficult to predict exactly what those are going to be. Sometimes it's you go in with a project statement and you negotiate, these are the things we need to do. Other times we develop those ahead of time and go to them. So it's kind of difficult to say exactly what it would be, but there would likely be some sort of mitigation measures, conservation measures that we would have to undertake as part of that program.
Okay. Well, I guess the last thing that I would ask is, what is the biological benefit to having river otters down in the Southwest? I'm not talking about it'd be cool to see them, but I mean, and this is I think Jeremy and I have had discussions about, what's the biological benefit of putting them in there, because they're not there now. So what would we be fixing?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Salazar Henry, I think, intact ecosystems always have biological value to it, and that historically river otters were in that system. Historically, that system was a lot different as well, probably from a fish-prey density system. When river otters were last present in the Gila, I would imagine that fish assemblage, population densities, the fish that were there looked a lot different too. I think that there is a lot of ecological benefit to have that predator in the system. The question is, where are you with the system right now? Are you close to that? Is that the key component that's missing from the system? Or is there other components missing from the system, like the fish assemblage that was there? Or is there drastic differences there? So I think that's the concerns and questions on is, are we so significantly different? Or can we build back up to something? You know, there are non-native invasives in there as well, too, that are not aquatic fish. We talked crayfish, bullfrogs, those kind of things. Could otters have a benefit on that? Potentially. They definitely could. They could potentially eat and outcompete some of the crayfish and bullfrogs. Will they? It's hard to say. I think the cautionary is, what is going to be the impact on those smaller populations of endangered fish? So I do think there is an ecological benefit to have them there in an intact system, and where are we to intact? And I guess if that makes sense, it's hard to say where you're there on that spectrum from where they were historically.
Well, and Madam Chair, this will be my last comment. I just, that picture or that piece of any future analysis, in my opinion, is more important for me to understand whether that it's the missing piece that would have all those benefits, and in my opinion would warrant the potential risk to all the decades of work that's been invested in that system for those endangered fish. So I appreciate you guys very much bringing this here and informing us a little better. And I imagine we'll have more conversations about this topic, so you're not going away.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'm going to take one more comment from Vice Chair, and then I'd like to get some of the members of the public.
Thank you for indulging all my questions. This is, there's a lot here. Can you just, and this is to either of you, just remind us, I mean, the commission's been here before. Am I right or wrong that the commission under the Richardson administration gave approval to move forward with otter reintroduction in the Gila?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vesbach, I believe it was 2006, there was a go-ahead on both the Rio Grande and the Gila River. It was rescinded in 2012.
Okay. And when were otters reintroduced into the Verde? Do we know that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Vesbach, it was in the 80s, roughly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. Melissa Savage, Joseph Zuba, Jesse Duvall, Chris Smith, Steve Harris. I don't see your comment as that relating to agenda item number 8. I think it was something that we had discussed earlier, but let's proceed with Melissa Savage. Would you like to step forward, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Commissioner and Commissioners. My name is Melissa Savage. I am a retired professor of ecology and an advisor to the Otter Specialist Group of the IUCN. I've been involved in otter restoration for a couple of decades now. And first of all, I would like to thank Director Sloan and the department for taking such good care of the otters in the Upper Rio Grande, and for awarding a share with wildlife for Dr. Cox to study the status and distribution, and also to do the study on the Red River that showed that otters were not having a big impact on the sport fishery there, and especially for bringing in some more genetic diversity to the Upper Rio Grande population. I also agree with Chief Patton that the Upper Rio Grande and the Gila rivers are extremely different rivers. And I think that, as has been said here before, the good analog is the Verde River. The Verde is actually part of the Gila watershed. It flows into the Salt, which flows into the Gila in southern Arizona, where it is, of course, extremely dry. And the Verde otter population, which I think was introduced in the mid-70s, flows through a very similar landscape. It's arid, it's got a riparian forest alongside it. It's about the same size. It is also a very flashy river, like the Gila. So I think we can think about that as a better analog for what might happen in the Gila. It also has an endangered fish population with many of the same species that we have in the Gila. And that, you know, it's been going on 50 years now since the otters were established there. Otter populations expand based on what the prey base is, what the population can be supported. So even though there's plenty of fish in the Upper Rio Grande and that population has grown, I expect that the Gila population of otters would never be very big. There is a small but stable population of otters in the Verde. And of course, apparently, there is a stable population of endangered fish species in the Verde. So that makes a kind of good analog case for us to investigate further. The Game Commission decided in 2006 to restore otters to the Gila and the Upper Rio Grande, as was said before. But in 2012, the decision was actually paused. Is that my 3 minutes? This is my last sentence. Okay. It was actually paused, not rescinded. It was paused pending on more information. And in the 9 years since then, we have really accumulated a great deal more information. And we have developed some pertinent reports. And I just think that I would encourage the Commission to start to investigate this, just to open the conversation about the possibility of establishing a small but sustainable river otter population in the Gila River.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa Savage. Joseph Zupa?
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, Mr. Director. I'd first like to just offer my kudos and appreciation to the Department for this responsible management of the population of otters in the Upper Rio Grande. Amigos Bravos is my organization. Our charge, our mission for 33 years is watershed protection. So, you know, what do we do to get healthy watersheds? And so I'm more of an environmental engineer than a wildlife biologist. But I really appreciate the efforts that the department took and the Taos Pueblo for the initial reintroduction back in 2008. The organization was supportive of that effort, and we kind of took it on as a little bit of a hobby for our group to monitor the extent of river otters. Our supporters kind of give us sightings, and we put them up on our website. Our board chairman actually has a river rafting company up in Taos, and his comment is that his clients not only enjoy seeing the otters, but take delight, and he gets repeat business. It's like, let's go back and see the otters. So it's kind of a thing for New Mexico's outdoor recreation economy as well. We're supportive of the efforts to investigate reintroduction in the Gila. This presentation today by our two chiefs here was excellent. We think it has some real potential. I think the point that river otters were native to the Gila up till the early 50s just kind of illustrates that having an intact ecosystem and including its apex predator, which, you know, in that case was the river otter, is important to the overall health of a watershed. So Amigos Bravos appreciates your work on this, and we support you, and anything we can do to be helpful, please let us know.
Thank you. Mr. Jesse Dubell.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Thank you, Chief Lively, Chief Patton, for an excellent presentation. I'm Jesse Dubell, Executive Director of the New Mexico Wildlife Federation. And the Wildlife Federation is excited to start the conversation about talking about the reintroduction of these river otters. As always, the New Mexico Wildlife Federation believes very, very strongly in managing our state's wildlife through science. And I believe we have some of the best scientists, some of the best wildlife biologists alive in our Department of Game and Fish. And so I certainly trust their expertise, trust their experience, and would also like to emphasize the importance of very close monitoring. When we do something like this, we need to be very closely monitoring the effects, the impacts on other species, things like that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Steve Harris, I'm not sure if you'd like to speak now. He's gone. Okay. Chris Smith.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. It's nice to see you all in person for the first time in a really long time. My name is Chris Smith. I'm here on behalf of Wild Earth Guardians. I have spent countless memorable days on the Upper Rio Grande, starting, if my parents are to be believed, around 4 months old. The most memorable of those days have included seeing otters, including last fall when an otter took a holdover rainbow stalker. And I've never been happier to lose a fish. And I would love to see it happen again. We support this effort. We're grateful to the caution and science that's going into it and would love to see otters in the Gila. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
I have 2 elementary questions.
Why don't we go with the comment here? I think we have one more, but he did not fill out a card.
I did, I unfortunately got it up there.
Oh, okay,
so
well,
I
just go ahead and state
apologize.
your name and then we'll go to Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioners. Michael Dax with Wildlands Network, and it's great to see you all in person again. I really appreciate the presentation today, and I thought there were a lot of good questions asked. I especially appreciate Commissioner Salazar Henry's question about the, from a biological standpoint, what are the benefits? And I think, it's worth looking into the predation of crayfish and bullfrogs as having a net positive benefit for those listed species. I also appreciate Commissioner Vesbach's point about analysis paralysis, and as both chiefs pointed out, since Fish and Wildlife Service would likely require biological opinion, I don't think we need to get, the state needs to get caught up in that endless review loop before bringing in the feds and their biological opinion, looking at the impact since a lot of those endangered fish species, their management and recovery is the charge of the Fish and Wildlife Service. So I think we can, leverage those resources to dig deeper and not rely entirely on the state to do that. But in addition to Amigos Bravos, Wildlands Network would be happy to provide our resources in additional scientific capacity at some point if that is welcomed. So thanks so much for considering this, and we also are in support of continuing to move this issue forward.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Madam Commissioner. Yes.
Very elementary. How many times a year do river otters bear young?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Kramer, just one time a year.
One time a year. And then how much or how many pounds of fish do they eat? Do we have any kind of data on that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Kramer, I think fish is dependent upon what other prey species that they're consuming, right? So I think it came back to some of that early on, like crayfish made up 66% of their occurrence. But was that 10% of their diet or was that 30% of their diet? It really has a drastic difference on then what poundage of fish they eat. So I think that's where the study was nice to know occurrence, but lacking in understanding quantities of diet. And I think that's one of the energetic questions that a lot of researchers are trying to go at. I think that would be an important step to look at if they're reintroduced. I think you look at energetics and what is not only occurrence, but what are they consuming and how much are they consuming, because then you can predict potential impacts after that.
Very good.
I also put a card in, but I think I put it in too late.
Go ahead.
I'll be very brief. I'm Logan. I'm with New Mexico Wild. Just wanted to echo the thanks to the department for the work on the Upper Rio Grande population. Echo the support of other organizations for reintroduction in the Gila, and appreciate the interest in keeping it based on science and well monitored. And also would like to say that New Mexico Wild would be happy to put in a good faith effort to help find financial resources for the work, as well as any other support we can get. Thanks.
Very nice. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Chief Stuart Lively and Chief Kurt Patton. Okay, let's move on to the next agenda item. Yes.
We have a large number of email comments on otters. We said we were going to read those.
Wonderful.
We said we were going to read those out during agenda item 10, but I could do it now if you'd like.
I think that's wonderful, and again, kudos to the department. I see all that IT stuff going on there with Chief Lance Chair. Yeah, so please, go ahead.
Yeah, make sure that I get down to the bottom of where they all start, since there are a few. Okay, let's see. Dear Game Commission members, the river otter was native to the Gila River until the 1950s. Non-native fish and crayfish have degraded the Gila River. As a natural predator of these fish, otters will help improve the health of the ecosystem. There's no evidence of otters having adverse effects on native fish populations in northern New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, or Montana. A cautious reintroduction of a small number of otters to the Gila River will allow the Department of Game and Fish to assess their impact and determine how best to proceed with full reintroduction. In trying to improve the health of the Gila River, I urge you to consider the introduction of the river otter. Sincerely, Karen Nakahara, Silver City. To whom it may concern, I grew up on a ranch where there was a river flowing through our cottonwood riparian area. How wonderful it would have been to have our native otters there, having seen their relatives on the coast. All of these species created our state, and they deserve to live here again. And then I can read it again, but it's the same text as was on the earlier one. The river otter was native to the Gila River until the early 1950s. Non-native fish and crayfish have degraded the Gila, etc. And it closes with, thanks so much for your attention to this email. Kirsten Lear, Amalia, New Mexico. Hello, Game Commissioner. Our mother needs to have all her furry friends protected and reintroduced where and when possible. A reintroduction of the river otter will help keep down and perhaps even eliminate the invasive species of fish and crayfish which have degraded the Gila. All native fish and plants need to be protected along the flow of the Gila. It is not only helpful to the otters to be reintroduced, but extremely helpful to the ecosystem's health. Please do give it a try with a few otters and see the great benefit that ACT brings to our Gila. Sincerely, Barbara Simon, member of New Mexico Wild, Albuquerque Wildlife Federation, Sierra Club, etc. Dear Commissioners, as a New Mexican who deeply values our native wildlife and who has worked in our national forest for the USDA Forest Service, I'm writing to ask you to support a trial introduction of native otters to the Gila River by the Department of Game and Fish. The plan to use limited reintroduction to evaluate a general reintroduction is a good one. Not only will the otters prey on non-native species, but they will benefit water quality. Thank you for the work on behalf of wildlife management in our beautiful state. Sincerely, Rita Gentry, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Thank you for taking the time to hear my comment today. I'm Brian Bird, the Director of Defenders of Wildlife Southwest Program. Defenders is a nonprofit 501c3 organization that works to ensure the protection of native plants and animals and their habitats throughout North America. Defenders has more than 2.2 million members, supporters, and online activists nationwide, including more than 7,800 in New Mexico. I'd like to start by thanking the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish for its dedication to the reintroduced Upper Rio Grande Otter population. Without the department's careful management, New Mexico would not have a healthy, thriving population of river otter today. The department's continued care for the river otter, including the recent release of individuals, has brought a key native species back to the Upper Rio Grande and rescued a piece of New Mexico's wildlife heritage. Members of Defenders, along with many other New Mexicans, would like to see a similar success story in the Gila River. Like in the Upper Rio Grande, river otters used to be a key predator in the Gila River. Since the river otter's extirpation from the Gila in the 1950s, populations of non-native invasive species have exploded, degrading the delicate ecosystem. Invasive species such as crayfish, bullfrog, and a myriad of predatory fish pose significant threats to native, threatened, and endangered species in the Gila River system. Reintroducing river otter into the Gila River would help restore balance to the ecosystem by providing an apex predator to prey on these invasive species. Faced with a similar problem, Arizona reintroduced river otter in the Verde River drainage in the 1980s. The Verde River, like the Gila River, runs through an arid landscape and is a source of water for important riparian oases through the desert. The two rivers also contain many of the same threatened and endangered aquatic species. Since its reintroduction, the river otter has helped restore balance in the Verde River because it preys primarily on the invasive fish species while generally avoiding the smaller native fish. In fact, the river otter prefers to eat crayfish, with some individuals preying exclusively on crayfish. Given the successful reintroduction in the Upper Rio Grande and the Verde River, it is likely that a release of a small number of river otters in the Gila River would benefit the ecosystem and reduce damage caused by invasive species. Because the reintroduction would be small, New Mexico Game and Fish could closely monitor the otters and assess their impacts on the ecosystem, which would most likely be beneficial. I urge the department to seriously consider reintroducing river otter into the Gila River. This is New Mexico's opportunity to protect threatened and endangered species, heal the Gila River ecosystem, and rescue another piece of New Mexico's wildlife heritage. Thank you for your time, and please enter this comment into the record. Brian Bird, Director, Southwest Program, Defenders of Wildlife. Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm submitting, is it still morning? Submitting comments to be read during agenda item number 10, public comment. These comments address agenda item 8, River Otter Overview. I am Donna Stevens, the Executive Director of the Upper Gila Watershed Alliance, a watershed protection nonprofit based in Gila. We have about 300 members, most of whom live in southwest New Mexico, and I am authorized to speak on behalf of our organization's members, staff, and board of directors. We are grateful to the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish for their effective management of river otters in the Rio Grande and for the recent release of additional otters to improve genetic diversity. The reintroduction of river otters into their ancestral home in the Gila River has been a goal of our organization for several years. As you know, there are imperiled fish, notably federally endangered spiked ace and loach minnow, barely holding on in the Gila. Because river otters largely prey on non-native crayfish and introduced slow-moving fish, their return to the Gila is expected to improve native fish populations. We advocate for the release of a modest number of otters and careful monitoring of their impacts. Arizona's Verde is very similar to the Gila River, as it too flows through an arid landscape with riparian corridors dominated by native willows and cottonwoods. The presence of river otters in the Verde over the past 35 years does not appear to have harmed the river's threatened and endangered fish. It's reasonable to expect the same result in the Gila River. On a personal note, I was amazed and delighted to see river otters in the Rio Grande last month while hiking with a friend in the Rio Grande del Norte National Monument. This charismatic species should be allowed to once again play its rightful role in the Gila River ecosystem. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this important issue and for your service on behalf of New Mexico's wildlife. Donna Stevens, Executive Director of Upper Gila Watershed Alliance.
Director?
Yes.
How many more emails do you have?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 9. At least 9. Probably eventually 12. I can certainly print them and get them to you, or forward them to you after the meeting.
Well, I want to treat everyone the same. I think I've been very generous with persons present, inviting everybody to come to the mic, even if I didn't have their card, okay? But people took the time to write something out. And now granted it's 12 noon, we can, part of me is thinking that I'd like to get all of those comments into the record, because that's what I've done with the persons present. I'd like to get them into the record. For the sake of efficiency.
I should read faster.
Not like speed reading, but thank you. I think what might be helpful is to forward them directly to all of the commissioners, at least that's what I'm thinking. Just forward all of those emails to each of the commissioners, all of us, get them into the record, and then also post them on the website, okay? Because I'd like the persons present here, it's part of the record. Could we do that? Or do we just continue letting them be read into the record? Again, I'm looking for the direct, you're the Mr. Secretary. by statute.
Yes,
go
can I
ahead.
make a suggestion that
Sure.
we break from reading these and go on to another item and then come back and finish the last 12?
We were gonna,
We could
we were gonna originally read them under agenda item 10, which
We
is.
were going to read them under agenda item 10? Okay, very good. Then let's do that. Okay, thank you, Commissioner, Madam Commissioner. Let's move on to agenda item number 9, I believe that is. Paul Varela, commission discussion on budget priorities.
Morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I'm here today to give you some information for discussion of budget priorities. You should have 4 documents in front of you. The first is the Game Protection Fund revenue and expenditure cash projection. The second is the 5-year ICIP plan, our capital outlay plan that was approved at the last commission meeting. Third is the cash balance for the department with some adjustments as of yesterday. And the fourth is the most reconciled data that we have for the department, which is the March reconciled data. I'd like to start with the first document in front of you, which is the Game Protection Fund revenue and expenditure cash projection. As a caveat, I'd like you to please ignore fiscal year 19 and 20. Those columns should not have been included in this document, and I apologize. Those numbers are incorrect. I would like to start on fiscal year 21 and moving forward. What this projection shows is revenue and expenditures for the Game Protection Fund for the current fiscal year going forward to fiscal year 25. Please keep in mind that these are projections, in finance, numbers are constantly changing and they adjust with just different variations of how much we're spending or how much we're saving and things of that nature. So just to explain this spreadsheet a little bit, row A is the beginning cash balance for the fiscal year. So in fiscal year 21, that 26.5 million is an audited number from FY 20, which is why I don't want you to pay attention to fiscal year 19 and 20 at the end. So row B, there's several rows, but in the entirety of that shows the estimated revenue for the department for fiscal year 21. Row C shows our projected expenditures for fiscal year 21. And row D should be our estimated ending cash balance for fiscal year 21. So I'd like you to keep in mind that fiscal year 21 is the current fiscal year that we're in. So these numbers are going to change. They're not audited. These are just assumptions that we are making. And these assumptions will be important for discussion purposes for the commission going forward, so that you can decide some of the priorities that the department may need to take in the future. So if we start with fiscal year 21, there are several assumptions in the spreadsheet that I want you to consider. Our operating budget expenditures in fiscal year 21 are 37 million. I don't know if that number will come to fruition. It's, like I said, it's an assumption. And so with our anticipated revenue and our anticipated expenditures for FY21, our ending cash balance that we're assuming is 24.7 million. So on July 1st, we'll be going into fiscal year 22. So I'm not exactly 100% sure what that number in column A or in row A will be, because it's not audited. But for assumption purposes, we are assuming, and so if you look at fiscal year 22, going forward, we are assuming a 2% increase in license revenue. These are assumptions that we have determined from the finance subcommittee meetings that we have all been participating in. We have agreed on these assumptions. We have also agreed on some assumptions going forward for our expenditures. For example, in FY23, which is the budget We will be building this summer, and which will be approved in a future commission meeting. I believe it's in August. We have assumed a $3 million increase, which is that $41 million number from FY22 to that $38.3 million in row C to that $41 million in row C also in fiscal year 23. We are assuming a 3% or a $3 million increase in expenditures. Now, our assumptions based on our finance committee meetings are increase in salary for employees, additional hires that we'd like to make for the department, and any other priorities that the commission might consider. And so then, as you can see, in fiscal year 23, under capital project appropriations, that $14.5 million number is the number that we have decided, or we have approved as a commission going forward for spending out of the Game Protection Fund. If you look in fiscal year 24, that $10 million is also approved in our capital project outlay plan, and the $8 million in fiscal year 25. So as you can see going forward, these capital appropriation numbers affect the total cash balance for our Game Protection Fund. Now, as a rule of thumb, our Game Protection Fund needs approximately $10 million to operate so that we don't have any cash flow issues. If we move forward with some of these capital appropriations, which is an important part of our operations, you'll see that our balance in FY24 dips to $4 million. So that will become an issue. And so I think these are important numbers to point out going forward, that if we continue on this path, we would need to make some decisions for the department in order to operate. So those are some of the issues that are facing the commission, and I would like for you guys to have a discussion based on some of the department priorities that you would like us to pursue. So I guess I would leave it, I would defer to Commissioner Salazar Henry to sort of open the discussion on some of the finance subcommittee issues that we discussed previously, if she would like to.
Okay, before we do that, let me just point out something else. In fiscal year 25, on row D, ending cash balance, I see, is that a negative 2.8?
Madam Chair, yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
I also want you to keep in mind that when we approve the capital outlay plan, we typically we have a 5-year outlay plan, but the year that counts is the next fiscal year. So it's 1 year at a time, but we also have 5 years of planning if we had the funding to fund for 5 years, but we typically don't, as you can see.
So also, I'd like to make it clear on the record, commissioners, the only 3 commissioners that have been meeting with you and the department with the director are the subcommittee, which includes Madam Commissioner Salazar Henry, Vice Chair Vesbach, and of course our Mr. Commissioner Bates. It's only you 3. We do not have a rolling quorum on any of these, okay? No violation of the Open Meetings Act. So everything that we're discussing here today is new to the entire commission. I want to get that on the record. So it is a serious matter. I thank you for opening it up for discussion, but before we do, did you have some recommendations, or would that come from the director? Or do you want to wait on it? You want to hear the discussion first?
Madam Chair, I think that there's sort of probably 2 answers to that. One, I think that adding $3 million to our operating budget to try to get raises for our employees and actually hire all of the positions in the agency is pretty important, and that was the priority that I had set, and that's why we have that 41.5 number. In the course of discussions with the Finance Committee, there were some other priority discussions, and I think that was the purpose of putting this on the agenda, was for the committee to bring those forward, whether that's OHVs, Open Gate, those sorts of things. I know they also generally agreed with the idea of taking care of our employees. So I think that's why we
Madam
refer
Chair.
to the Commissioner Salazar Henry in terms of which priorities and engaging the commission with those so that we can better develop a budget going forward.
Madam Chair, I also like to point out that there are increased fixed costs for the department that the department is facing, such as telephone usage, computer usage, internet usage, things like that, and we don't have any control of that. There's also risk management fees that increase every year. So
Litigation costs.
So these are just a few of the items that the department is facing, and so just based on some assumptions, we need to make decisions of how the commission would like to proceed financially.
We take our fiscal responsibility very seriously. So, okay, let's turn it over to Madam Chair. Madam Commissioner, thank you.
I got promoted again. So I thank you, Paul and Director Sloan and members of my committee. I think this is the start of an important discussion about how we move forward with tackling the issue of a license fee increase in the future. And if you look at the cash balance projection for the operating fund, all the other funds are dedicated funds. They can only be used for certain things. So that's why we focus on the Game Protection Fund. If you look at that, we will run through cash balance based on infrastructure type projects. We don't have the ability to pull money from somewhere else. This is why it's being reflected in the ICIP plan under the Game Protection Fund outlay. So, we have two choices. Basically, what we could not do these infrastructure projects and sit on the cash until whatever, but we're talking $5.5 million that go to our bread and butter hatcheries. That's, it's really important to do that. We're talking dam safety issues. They're not things that can go away. What we did discuss in the finance subcommittee meeting was we asked the director to look into other opportunities, maybe President Biden's infrastructure bill that may come through. There's dam monies in there that we verified with the senators that would be included in there. Could we go ahead and tap into that? The dam work that we're talking about in the ICIP is for public safety. It's not to improve fish habitat quality. It's a whole different purpose. And our dams are on the list with a bunch of others in the state that need to be addressed. And so those are big, huge outlays. Eagle Nest Lake, if you'll notice, is in FY24 capital plan. And that alone, I believe the director said, was a nice soft number, was 30 million just for that. There's no way we could pay for that. And so this is why we're having the discussion here, is for two things: to look at other ways and to be thinking about other ways on how we would either stretch our dollars so that we're not in the next year looking for a license fee increase next year without adequate preparation and support from all the folks that support the department, and including the governor's staff, and having long conversations with them as well. And so I'm not advocating for stopping anything or adding more money given the picture that we have right here to other things. I'm wanting to have a discussion about some of the issues that have been brought up about how we're spending our current funds in our current programs, and is there a way to shift priorities, lessen this over here and move it and emphasize something else. And so I guess one of the things I'll bring up is the OHV Trail Safety Program. There's it's building cash balance now again after the previous administration, governor, raided the fund during the recession to help balance the budget and to provide funds for other agencies. And so that hasn't occurred with this governor, which we're very grateful for. And so the cash is again staying in the fund and providing the opportunities for planning into the future on those strategies. We all received a letter, if you all remember, from a group of people, Mark Ellison, the Rio Grande Sierra Club, talking about the huge concern right now and the emails we're getting about OHV abuse on our public lands, and just, with the pandemic, it made it worse. people found a way to spend maybe their stimulus money, and they bought an OHV, and and they're out on the forest, and things are just, they're bad. And so I was looking at the program and listening to the conversation, the OHV meeting the other night, and those same people that wrote the letters, they showed up to the meeting to express their concern. What was evident to me, and in talking to an OHV board member, was that there has never been, with this current commission, any policy direction for that fund, or we should be emphasizing how that money is being spent. It is pretty much, I guess, been kind of recommended through the board, the OHV advisory board, but we've never sat and really talked about the fund. What can we do better? Well, we have a list of complaints and a list of suggestions on maybe how to shift those resources that are sitting in that budget to try to address some of these major issues with OHV abuse on our public lands, and it's damage to habitat. So,
I can just add one thing, Madam Chair, Commissioner. Statute, and I'll try and get these right. Or Desi may be able to fill in the gap. I believe by statute we have to spend 50% of the budgeted fund or the fund on education, no more than 20% on administration, and then that 30% is available for grants and habitat kind of work and that sort of stuff. So there is some guidance in statute already. And the other thing is that, as you point out, we've been building cash balance, but we're still kind of at the point where we're just sort of covering costs at this point of things that were, staff and those sorts of things. So I think there are opportunities going forward as long as the fund doesn't get raided, but there are those restrictions in statute as well.
well, if you refer back to the letter, one of the things they're asking for is increased education. So, the 50%, that's not a problem, but they're seeing more and more. What we understand is that people bought an ATV, they've decided to sell it and get a better one, so they're selling it to a private individual that necessarily when you go to buy a brand new one, you're required to take that education class. These other folks are not being educated, and they feel like that we need a greater effort into spending money on education efforts. They're talking about increased law enforcement presence, and maybe that the department would help develop a plan with all the folks that can provide law enforcement on the forest and any other public lands. But I mean, you're talking to sheriff and those folks in the state police, they're not going to be out there trying to deal with that. But we still need to be able to enforce the current OHV rules and laws. Some of the things that I know works, and our local sportsman's group has been involved in, is signage on the forest, where that somebody has created a trail that wasn't it's never been an official trail. We've been able to close those off, post signs that this is not a trail, it's against the law, and those things have helped. And so that's another place that we could shift money into providing more of that. And so this is just one of the things I was looking at to talk about today, and not come in August with a budget that's already prepared and we go, oh, by the way, we want you to shift all this money over here because we think this is a grand idea. And so this is just my way of engaging up front before we just get handed a budget on the back end and then we miss an opportunity to think about other policy issues that maybe we might want to have reflected in a budget that's going to start July 1st, 2022, right?
Yes.
So this is an open discussion as far as I'm concerned, and if it's just me, that's fine.
But we have two other committee members. I'd like to hear from them as well. Yeah.
Well, Madam Chair, I just tee up that, and I think the OHV fund in particular, when that was created, it was spoken about that habitat protection and restoration were a core part of the purpose, and I fully support moving towards, having some guidance that we'd like to see that habitat protection and restoration. You see a lot of, and those of us who are out there a lot, you're seeing a lot of new illegal roads, and it makes lawbreakers out of people who aren't necessarily trying to be. They come along, they see, oh, people have driven here, and so you got to stay on top of that. I think we have partners willing to put in for those grants. So yeah, I strongly support that, and support for wildlife, and I think it's important. And we have some capacity to increase that fund even, and so it's an important discussion that the commission has some authority over.
Okay.
Sure, I support that as well. I think, fundamentally to me, it's pretty easy looking at the budget. This is not sustainable, right? So what can you do? You can increase revenue, reduce expenses, or combine those two. So I think we're gonna have a big challenge coming up for the next capital outlay, because that's the biggest piece. But I think we have to go back also and look at the revenue piece. And we're in desperate need for fee increases. And I don't know how we're gonna get there, when we can get there, but I'm all in favor of pushing that quickly and working with the governor's office if we can to just really stress the urgency. And sometimes legislatively, maybe there's never a good time to do that, but there's a necessary time. So it seems to me that needs to be a high priority, right? And then we can take a hard look at capital. It's hard to delay, and I agree with the director. We have to take care of our personnel. So to me, that's not an option. Right? That money there for personnel has to remain, and probably that's not enough. I think there's still some gaps with our biologists and our law enforcement officers that we haven't closed, and so that number is probably not even enough. And so we can't mess with the salary piece. You cannot continue to defer capital if you expect to have sustainability in your infrastructure. So we've got to address this revenue piece, and to me, that's probably the biggest concern I have going forward, because the expenses will continue to increase. That's life, and they're going up quicker now, even today, than they were last year. So that's not going away. And some of these projections are probably, as we look at it, understated, particularly fuel for one, right? Just we're not budgeting those kind of increases. So this is a big problem. And
along those lines, Madam Chair, Commissioner, it's also important to note that the per diem rates went nearly doubled this past year through the legislature. So that's a cost we didn't build into our upcoming budget, and we'll need to be thinking hard about going forward.
Absolutely right. So I'm glad we're having the discussion now, because we've got a big challenge ahead of us. And I think fee increases won't come immediately, but they need to come. And so that means it will put pressure on capital outlay, and there will be deferments. That's just going to be necessary. We know that we can't let the cash balance drop below 10 million. So but we'll be asking the public and everyone for support on these fee increases, because what we have now is not sustainable. That's my 2 cents.
Good job so far. I'd like to hear from the other commissioners. I agree that we need to take care of our personnel. That's my top priority. When we were looking at a fee increase a couple of years ago, and I ran the numbers, a single officer coming into this department qualified for food stamps. And we need to do something. People are out they're the face of this department. Those officers that are going out there, they're the face of this department, and we aren't paying them. They're not competitive. We're losing officers to other states because they pay better. And revenue's the key. We need a license fee increase. But I mean, if we don't keep the personnel we have, if we don't recruit good personnel, it just trickles down and the department disintegrates. So we really need to take care of personnel.
Madam Chair, I will echo what the other commissioners have said. Being a former state employee myself, and also a member of organized labor, I understand how much our employees are important to sustainability of this entire state. And we all know as soon as we get the raise in July, medical premiums go up the same year. It happens every year. It didn't happen this last year, thank God to the executive, she stopped that. But we have a 1.5 coming in now, a few weeks, I think, and then it hits end of August and we get the first checks out. And I don't know if there's any rumors that medical premiums are going to go up. I haven't seen anything from risk management, so I hope not. But like you say, Commissioner Kramer, our officers are the face of the department. I mean, I wear this shirt because, one, black because we lost so many victims of COVID this year, but two, because our officers are out there, we're working enforcing these rules during COVID this year. And they were out there, and we do need to take care of them. I know when we were at WAFA a few years ago in Manhattan, Kansas, when I saw the comparison of how many states, you were with me in that committee meeting, of what they're paying, we're paying them pretty low. And if fee increases need to happen, I know that the public might not like that, but I mean, we need to look at that seriously, because in order to keep a beloved agency afloat, we do need some revenue from somewhere. And of course, change starts at the bottom. And our admin assistants are not making much money. Our biologists aren't making much money. Our farm workers out there who are keeping the wildlife refuges going aren't making much money. Our hatchery workers, which are supporting the entire state's recreation area, aren't making much money. I mean, and I hate to say it, but sometimes our workers are living in houses that were built during the Great Depression. So I mean, we're at a tough line, but I think with the support of the executive and the state legislature, we do seriously have to look at a fee increase. And that's not going to solve anything right away, but it's a path to a brighter future, I hope. So thank you guys, all the employees out there listening in here today, for what you're doing. Because little does the public know, you guys keep this department going. Thanks so much.
Madam Chair, I guess there's couple of things I want to say is that I think the conversation was important to have today, because we all need to be very aware of our opportunities that may be coming up, our challenges for the department. And this just emphasizes why we can't just jump into a brand new program like reintroduction of otters that may cost money, that right now that we're just talking about the programs we have on the books at the level they are, that we know it's not even meeting expectations from the public. So I think this is very important. I want to go back to the letter to Rick Alcone, the chair of the OHB. There are 4 suggestions in there from the concerned public about OHB misuse on public lands and of what can be done. So, and one of them is advising the New Mexico Game Commission to consider stronger rulemaking to punish egregious OHV misuse. And I've never really thought about that. And we take away people's hunting and fishing privileges when they abuse them. And this is another program. So, I mean, that's something we can consider. But mostly what I'd like to do is I would like to ask the game department to look at this letter and to, when they develop the OHV budget, see where they can shift and increase within the parameters of the law to try to start addressing some of these. I know there's been some complaints that the grants that are being offered are too small, they don't really amount to much. And I know on the flip side, the game department's providing signs and they give them to the Forest Service and they say, well, we don't have the manpower to put them up. So I mean, there's a lot of little things going to it. So I know that, my perspective doesn't have the whole picture on what's happening on both ends. So if you could just take a look at that and let's see if we can start moving towards that, and then maybe at a later commission meeting, start talking about including OHV, egregious OHV use as a potential revocation of privileges as well. So that's my conclusion of this today.
Well, I want to say kudos. Kudos to you, Madam Commissioner, also Department of Game and Fish, and the committee members. I want to say thank you and kudos for the good work that you're doing with regard to the budget. I think having a forecast, anticipation, the strategic planning is critical, okay? Financial responsibility, the department and the commission is important. And it's good to have these kind of discussions to look ahead. I like creativity. I think that's very important. Thinking outside of the box, that letter, important. Get it out to all of the commissioners, okay? I'm not sure I've seen it. Did I see that?
It went to everybody.
It did go everybody?
Yeah.
Well, let's get it out again.
I'll forward it.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay. I think that, again, this is a discussion item. It's not an action item. But again, looking forward, what are you anticipating before our August meeting? You'll have another discussion, the committee with the department. And
Madam Chair, some of that discussion will also depend on the guidance from the Department of Finance on whether or not we can increase our budget.
right.
In some ways, we're a little restricted when we build our budget, but it doesn't mean that we can't try.
Well, we can try. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, at this point, the Finance Committee isn't advocating for increase our budget by 10%. If you'll notice, I mean, it's really pretty flat. I mean, we haven't done anything wild other than go after infrastructure and capital outlay in our ICIP plan and projections here. I guess one last thing I just want to remind everybody that we talked with Paul and the director about was the fact that those fixed costs, if you look at the Game Protection Fund revenue expenditures cash projections, there's a line in section C that says transfer to other state agencies. That could, it's $735,000. It could be bigger if we included risk management, the do-it, the IT, and all that, which is like 500,000 right now or something crazy number. So that is, they're working on figuring that into projections as well, so that we know these, we're going to get to this is the basic number to keep the lights on before we start talking about expanding programs and have a real firm idea. So we will have another meeting in July to get closer to budget expectations, and the department will have instructions from executive on how to prepare their budget, and so we'll mesh all that together. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. We'll keep up the good work. Let's move on to agenda item number 10, and this is where we're going to listen to 7 or 8 more emails, did they say?
Well, 12.
Okay.
But who's counting?
Okay, good. Oh, thank you, Paul. Very good.
Are we ready?
Yes.
All right, me too. Ready this one already? Yes. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Kevin Bixby. I am the Executive Director of the Southwest Environmental Center in Las Cruces. We support efforts to restore river otters to their historic range in New Mexico. Our specific comments are as follows. Reintroduce river otters where they do not currently occur will help restore balance to New Mexico's aquatic ecosystem and enhance outdoor recreation in the state. Otter reintroduction will help achieve the goal of restoring and protecting the full range of native biodiversity on 30% of the nation's lands and waters by 2030. This 30 by 30 initiative is supported by the Biden administration, scientists around the world, and a growing number of states as an essential step towards addressing both the global extinction crisis and climate change. Otter reintroduction should be carefully monitored. If activities such as fishing or fur bearer trapping are suspected of negatively impacting otter survival and population growth, then these activities should be restricted as needed to allow otters to thrive. We understand the department has successfully implemented otter reintroduction in the Rio Grande in northern New Mexico, and we applaud the department for these efforts. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Good morning. On behalf of Susan Millsap, Director of Conservation Programs at TNC New Mexico, I am writing to provide the following public comment to the New Mexico Game Commission, and it's an attached letter, which thankfully is not too long. My name is Susan Millsap. I am the Director of Conservation Programs for the Nature Conservancy in New Mexico. I am emailing to submit public comment for item 8, River Otter Overview on the Commission's June 18, 2021 agenda. Our top conservation priority in New Mexico is protecting the long-term sustainability of the Gila River ecosystem. We have been landowners in the Cliff Gila Valley for more than 35 years and work diligently to maintain a constructive presence in the community. This continuing presence has provided us with an abiding appreciation of the interests and values of the agricultural community in the valley. Specifically, we want to emphasize the Department of Game and Fish is doing an excellent job managing the reintroduction of the Upper Rio Grande otter population. We thank the department and the commission for this important work. The river otter is native to the Gila River Basin, and its establishment there would be an important step in restoring that ecosystem. In addition, research has shown that when available, crayfish comprise a significant portion of the river otter's diet. The crayfish is an invasive species in the Gila River that is damaging the ecosystem and negatively impacts federally listed species such as the Chiricahua leopard frog. River otter predation on crayfish would be one of the many benefits of otter reintroduction. In the early 1980s, river otters were reintroduced into the Verde River in Arizona, a river very similar to the Gila River. Both run through an arid landscape with a riparian zone of cottonwood and willows. The Verde River has many of the same threatened and endangered aquatic species as the Gila River, and the small reintroduced river otter population does not appear to have harmed these species in the Verde River over the past 35 years. However, we recognize that any proposed reintroduction of river otters in the Gila River Basin has the potential for negative impacts to native fish and aquatic species populations, threatened and endangered species, and possibly to the river otters themselves. We urge the Commission to continue to assess the feasibility of river otter reintroduction into the Gila River Basin in the hope that lessons learned from otter reintroductions can be applied to a successful release in the Gila River Basin. The New Mexico Game Commission, I commend the department for its work on the reintroduction of otters to the Upper Rio Grande and hope they will develop a plan for reintroduction of otters to the Gila River. Thank you, Brian Long. Madam Chair, Commissioner, and Commissioners, my name is Mary Catherine Ray. I'm a wildlife chair for the Rio Grande chapter of the Sierra Club. Sierra Club supports the restoration of native species, including the river otter in New Mexico. We have been enthusiastically pleased to see this come to fruition in the Upper Rio Grande River, Upper Rio Grande River, and thank the department for recent releases of additional otters there to maintain the genetic health of this population. Otters were historically present in the Gila River until the middle of the last century. They still belong there. We acknowledge the concerns about the potential impacts of this charismatic carnivore on imperiled native fish and frogs. However, non-native fish, bullfrogs, and crayfish, where present, pose a greater existential threat to the river biome. In the Verde River in Arizona, where river otters were returned decades ago in a habitat similar to the Gila River, they have shown a preference for eating and controlling these non-natives. Native, including imperiled species, have not been harmed. Careful monitoring of the impact of initial otter release in the Gila River will mitigate these concerns. We may indeed learn that bringing back otters will not only restore these delightful creatures where they have been wrongfully absent, but also prove to be beneficial to the conservation of the river's other native species. Aldo Leopold wrote, quote, "A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise," unquote. The restoration of river otters to the Gila can right some wrongs and bring back something that is right. Sincerely, Mary Catherine Ray. This one, I'm going to read it so I don't lose it. It's not an otter comment. Dear Game Commission, please deny all additional pending certifications of the Landowner Certification Non-Navigability Rule until the New Mexico Supreme Court has issued its ruling. This misguided rule has already restricted public access to 5 streams in New Mexico, despite the state constitution guaranteeing public access to our waterways. Please protect public access to New Mexico's rivers and streams. Regards, Michael Lombardi, Levittown, PA. My name is Joel Gay, and my comments today are my own. They do not represent any organization or group. The Commission has already closed public access to a number of streams and may close more today under 1931-22 NMAC. I would urge the Game Commission to specifically prohibit any landowner from fencing off, posting no trespassing signs, or in any other way prohibiting public access to any stretch of stream that has not been deemed non-navigable by the State Game Commission. The New Mexico Supreme Court is currently considering whether 1931-22 is even constitutional. Allowing landowners to prohibit public access to the waters of New Mexico is the equivalent of finding someone guilty before there has been a trial. Please make every stream owner go through the process spelled out in 1931-22 in order to officially close any stream that runs through their land. Until then, those streams should remain open. Thank you. Good morning. This letter is no doubt arriving at the last minute, but I wanted to express my support for what environmental groups are calling a cautious reintroduction, unquote, of the river otter to our local and much loved Gila River. Although people occasionally report sightings of river otters, most experts believe that the river otter has not lived along the Gila for 60 to 70 years. As you know, many biologists have noted that river otters are natural predators of invasive fish and will thereby help restore the health of our local riparian ecosystem. River otters thrive in other ecosystems further north, and data from those more northern rivers show that otters have had no adverse effects on those habitats. Indeed, climate change may doom such a local reintroduction project to failure. But I am hopeful this adaptive species might gain a foothold in the Gila. As a citizen of Silver City and a high school environmental science teacher, I support the use of public funds to enable the Department of Game and Fish to assess river otter impact and determine how best to proceed with a full reintroduction. Jim McIntosh, Silver City. I think this Otters in the Gila River is a subject line. I think this is a great idea. Reintroducing otters will balance the food chain and be a delight for hikers, hunters, fishermen, and campers who will be entertained watching their antics. Gene Mosley, Silver City. Dear Game Commission, please deny all additional certification of landowner certification non-navigability rule until the New Mexico Supreme Court has issued its ruling. This misguided rule has already restricted public access to 5 streams in New Mexico despite the state constitution guaranteeing public access to our waterways. Please protect public access to New Mexico's rivers and streams. Robert Gilman, Albuquerque. Introduction of otters to the Rio Grande has been a great success. Now it's time for otters to put the Gila back in order, just a few at a time to see how it goes. It's been 68 years. Roger Peterson, New Mexico Natural History Institute, Santa Fe. Hello, I support the reintroduction of river otters to the Gila River. Me and my family love all the Gila wilderness and we hike and camp along the river often, and I think it would benefit the ecosystem greatly to have the otters reintroduced. Best regards, Tim Noger, Geoscientist Supervisor, NMED Petroleum Storage Bureau. Dear Game Commission, please deny all additional pending certifications on the landowner certification and a non-navigability rule until the New Mexico Supreme Court has issued its ruling. This misguided rule has already restricted access to 5 streams in New Mexico despite the state constitution guaranteeing public access to our waterways. Please protect public access to New Mexico's rivers and streams. Elliot Jim in Waterflow, New Mexico. This is to urge Commission to reintroduce otters into the Gila River. They were once and can help balance the good and not so good species. Thank you, Sally Sabo, Santa Fe. I am pleased to hear that you all will consider reintroducing otters to the Gila River. As an outdoor enthusiast who lives in Grant County, I am a supporter of the measure. Dr. G. Campbell, Silver City. Dear Game Commission, please deny all additional pending certifications on the landowner certification non-navigability rule until the New Mexico Supreme Court has issued its ruling. This misguided rule has already restricted public access to 5 streams in New Mexico despite the state constitution guaranteeing public access to our waterways. Please protect public access to New Mexico's rivers and streams. Carmen Stephen in Silver City. Hello, I completely support the reintroduction of otters to the Gila and I urge you to do so. Thank you. Lisa Farad, Santa Fe. To the New Mexico Game Commission, I'm asking you to support the reintroduction of river otters in the Gila River. Non-native fish and crayfish have degraded the Gila River. As a natural native predator of these fish, otters will help improve the health of the ecosystem. There is no evidence of otters having adverse effects on native fish populations in northern New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, or Montana. I am asking you to support the reintroduction of river otters to maintain a healthy balance in the entire river ecosystem. Thank you, Roland Adara and Budo. And I think this is the last one unless people are hearing me and sending more comments. I already read this one, so there you go. I believe that is it.
Very good. I have a question for you, Director and Attorney General, Assistant Attorney General Valerie. Some of these comments pertain to the non-navigable water certification applications from the landowners, which has been tabled. And typically when a record is made, it is incorporated. Do you think some of those comments regarding the applications should be part of? Should we include them in the upcoming, because we're opening up comments?
Madam Chair, I think in the interest of taking all comment and getting as much information as we can. I was planning to include those in any
Perfect. Okay.
upcoming comments that are made, as well as carrying forward the previous comments.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I am in agreement.
Okay, very good. Just wanted to make sure that's very clear to the commissioners and the department and to the public, okay? Again, we're very interested in due process and fair and open, transparent. So that concludes agenda item number 10.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, this again is a comment card.
Oh,
Chair, I apologize. We're a little out of practice and a little short-staffed.
well, I know the chair has a lot of discretion with the meeting, you know. I've been taking liberty and I'm going to continue. Please, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm still shaking off the rust of the past year and a half in the cave of Zoom comments, so we'll figure it out. And I was actually asked to come here today as well to read into the record the letter that Commissioner Salazar Henry has been referring to. I would just defer to you, Madam Chair, if you'd prefer me to read it. It's rather short, or just if there's a place for me to email it to make sure it is in the record of today's meeting.
Well, I had suggested earlier to just put it into the record, but I think I heard everybody say, let's have it read. And we did that with the director, so please go ahead and read it.
Okay. So it's Dear Chairman Alcon, over the last several years, the incidence of illegal off-highway vehicle misuse has increased exponentially throughout New Mexico. Our members and the members of other like-minded conservation and environmental organizations are reporting increased illegal off-trail activity by OHVs in virtually every national forest and BLM region statewide. As you know, illegal OHV activity fragments critical wildlife habitat, increases wildfire threat, exacerbates erosion, and greatly impacts watershed functionality. As unfettered OHV activity increases in an area, the quality of hunting and wildlife viewing opportunity greatly decreases. And outdoor recreationists seeking a quiet, non-motorized backcountry experience are finding it harder and harder to find areas not overrun by illegal OHV activity. With this in mind, we encourage the Department of Game and Fish, OHV Advisory Board, as well as the Commission to do the following. Implement an ambitious statewide outreach and education campaign targeting OHV users and OHV organizations. Coordinate a statewide collaborative enforcement action plan involving Department of Game and Fish, the Forest Service, BLM, State Land Office, Sheriff, and State Police. Utilize OHV trail fund dollars to increase signage, information kiosks, trailhead signage, build new gates and barrier structures, and decommissioning or restoration of illegal routes. And finally, advise the Department of Game and Fish Commission to consider stronger rulemaking to punish egregious illegal OHV infractions. Your consideration on this matter is greatly appreciated. We look forward to seeing the New Mexico OHV Advisory Board and the Department of Game and Fish Commission act decisively on this issue. And it's signed from Mark Allison, Executive Director, New Mexico Wild, Denise Foster, Executive Director, Conservation Voters of New Mexico, Joseph Zupan, Executive Director, Amigos Bravos, Camilla Fiebelman, Executive Director, Rio Grande Chapter Sierra Club, and Jesse Dubell, Executive Director of New Mexico Wildlife Federation. And then, sorry, the last thing is you may have heard some repeated comments that were just read. So I would advise the commission to maybe either allow for virtual comments to be made at the August 12th meeting, or to have those comments go directly into the record, because those were just a few of the comments that we generated, of which I believe the count was at 900 just in the past week on the stream access issue. So there's going to be, I think, a pretty tremendous public push. I don't know that the director wants to read 1,000 comments.
Madam Chair, no matter how you feel about it, there is no public comment at the hearing, so I won't be reading them, but if they come in by the deadline, they will be part of the record.
Thank you. That was very good. And thank you, Director, for pointing that out. You did not read the chapter 1932. Yeah. Okay.
I can if you'd like.
No. Okay, so it is now almost 1 o'clock, and we are going into our last second to the last agenda item, number 11, the executive session. It is closed to the public. The commissioners will vote on whether to adjourn into executive session. And I think I need a motion on that. For the record, we have designated 1 hour for the executive session. Commissioners, do you think we're going to get all of that done in an hour? Just in fairness to the public, I think we can wrap up by 2, don't you think? Okay. Can I have a motion from someone?
Specific motion?
Yeah, there is a motion.
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I move to adjourn into executive session, close to the public pursuant to section 10-15-1H8 NMSA 1978 to discuss property acquisition and pursuant to section 10-15-1H7 NMSA 1978 to discuss matters subject to attorney-client privilege relating to threatened or pending litigation in which the commission and/or department is or may become a participant as listed in agenda item 11, subsections A, B, and C.
Second. Very good. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Salazar Henry.
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez.
Yes.
Commissioner Kramer.
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Vice Chair Vesbach.
Yes.
Chair Salazar Hickey.
Yes.
Motion passes. We'll be meeting in room 326.
Okay, very good. Okay, it's now 2:05 and the commission is returning from the executive session. We need a motion about the executive session. Mr. Secretary, can you please read that into the record for us?
This commission had adjourned into executive session closed to the public. During the executive session, the commission discussed only those matters specified in its motion to adjourn, and it took no action as to any matter.
Thank you.
Read it with some feeling.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner.
Madam Chair, I would move to approve the terms and conditions of the purchase agreement for the property consisting of 7,416.9 acres in Debaca and Roosevelt counties, and to further authorize the Secretary to the New Mexico State Game Commission and Director of the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, Michael B. Sloan, to execute and deliver any and all documents necessary to complete the purchase of said property. The approval and authorization granted herein shall be effective immediately.
Second.
Mr. Director, can we please have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Salazar Henry.
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez.
Yes.
Commissioner Kramer.
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Vice Chair Vesbach.
Yes.
Chair Salazar Hickey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Very good. I think that's the last business that we have on agenda item number 11. Now we can move into agenda item number 12, where we are going to adjourn, and it's an action item. It's rather pro forma. Just for the record, we are going to be meeting again in August 12th, and the location TBD. And thank you, Mr. Director and Department of Game and Fish, for this televised meeting. I know there was a lot of work by the commissioners, and you were very prepared today, and I want to say thank you for all that you've done today. It's been a very a big lift. Okay, motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, sir.
Second that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Really?
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.